Chapter 1. The Disappearing Act. The first chill of autumn had settled upon London when I received the invitation that set my pulses racing. It was delivered by hand to 21B Baker Street, slipped beneath my door on crisp cream stationery embossed with a small silver microphone motif. The envelope bore no return address, only my name, Mr. Hastings, in an elegant copperplate hand. Inside lay a single sheet, folded once, my dear Mr. Hastings. I write in the utmost haste, and with a matter so curious that I had to summon you at once. Monsieur Hercule Poirot will arrive by the 11:15 train from Victoria. Pray meet him there, and accompany him to the Savoy Hotel. Bring only your wits, for tomorrow evening's performance will prove unforgettable. Yours sincerely, a friend of. The RTI admit that I was not at first sure what art the anonymous correspondent meant. Yet the very shape of the note, its elegant brevity and discreet flourish, told me that Poirot would surely wish my company. I tucked the letter into my waistcoat pocket and hurried to Victoria, where station clocks gleamed in the grey dawn light. At platform 6, I found Poirot standing beside the first-class carriage, his waxed moustaches and immaculate morning coat, precisely as I remembered. He turned at my approach, his keen black eyes bright beneath his pince-nez. "Ah, mon ami Hastings," he said, offering his slender gloved hand. "You have received the summons." "Indeed, Hercule. But I confess, I know not its meaning." I handed him the letter, and he read it with a delicate frown. "A performance tomorrow evening," he mused, refolding the note. "And a friend of the art. Art, yes, the art of illusion, perhaps, or something more. Ventriloquence?" His little grey cells evidently began to whirl. "Only one way to know. Let us to the Savoy without delay." The taxi ride to the Strand was smooth, and we entered the Savoy's cool marble foyer just as the clock in the lounge struck 11:15. At a corner table sat a figure in evening dress, a top hat placed beside him, slender shoulders, draped in a cloak of midnight blue. He rose with a flourish as we approached. "Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings," he greeted, voice low and cultivated, with a faint continental accent. "I am Theodore Priam, manager of the Grand Inquiry Bureau. Thank you both for coming." He offered us chairs. Behind him, servants arrived bearing silver trays of coffee. Poirot inclined his head. "Monsieur Priam, you summoned us." Priam pressed a hand to his forehead, his expression grave. "I believe you will find this case most extraordinary. May I introduce my client, the celebrated ventriloquist, Signor Vincenzo Montague." From the shadows behind Priam stepped a tall, gaunt man of perhaps 50, hair shot with silver at the temples. His evening coat was slightly rumpled, and his hands bore the tremulous grace of one unused to constraint. He inclined his head in greeting, his lips curved in a thin, rueful smile. "Monsieur," he said, his voice a deep baritone, yet inexplicably a second voice, high and nasal, issued from his mouth as though someone else were speaking. "I beg your pardon for the unusual nature of my predicament." The second voice, clear, bright, imperious, interrupted. "Yes, Monseigneur, truly, a predicament most preposterous." I started, glancing at Poirot in astonishment. There stood the ventriloquist and his dummy, side by side, each speaking in turn, though no wooden puppet was visible. It was as though the signor's talent had been split in two. More astonishing still, the dummy's voice seemed to emanate from an empty air. Priam laid a gentle hand on Montague's arm. Dr. Lancaster of St. Bart's can confirm that Signor Montague suffers no neurological condition. Yet 2 nights ago he paled. Vincenzo and his beloved dummy, Bartholomew, vanished without trace from the stage of the Apollo Theatre. The only sign was this one fragment of puppet lore. He produced a small carved piece of wood, the remains of Bartholomew's chin, the slightest sliver, no larger than a fingernail. Poirot lifted the fragment to the light of the table lamp. "Indeed, Hastings, the grain of the wood is sycamore, as in the finest French puppetry," he observed, "but the carving is unmistakably English in style." He set it gently upon a handkerchief. "Signor Montague, you performed last on the evening of the 14th. What transpired?" Montague, his real voice now, closed his eyes for a moment, gathering himself. "The performance was a sell-out. Bartholomew and I concluded the evening with our customary duet. I speaking as myself, he replying in his own unique register. The audience was enraptured. At the end I turned to embrace him, and in that instant Bartholomew vanished. I was alone on stage. The curtain fell, and I was unable to speak in my own voice. Only Bartholomew's voice remained. He paused, second voice bellowing. Indeed, I was bereft of speech. A most disconcerting state of affairs. Priam continued the account. Signor Montague hadn't been seen since, when I received his frantic telegram, consisting of unbroken, Bartholomew voice gibberish. I knew to summon Monsieur Poirot. So here we are. He bowed. Tomorrow night the theatre reopens, with a new act billed to feature Signor Montague and his dummy, who will, I trust, be present. He swallowed. Yet I fear for the audience and for Signor Montague himself. We need your guidance. Poirot steepled his fingers and leaned back. Gentlemen, we have several mysteries. The vanishing of the dummy, the shifting of Montague's voice into Bartholomew's timbre, and the apparent absence of the puppet itself. We shall visit the Apollo Theatre at once, inspect the stage, the wings, and the dressing rooms. Hastings, do you recall our first case at the Lyric, when the missing manuscript turned up in the overhead lighting? We must examine every crevice. The theatre opens at 1 for rehearsals, Priam said. Shall we proceed? Poirot rose, moustaches glinting. Immediately. Time, as always, is of the essence. The Apollo Theatre stood in a narrow strand, side street, its neon letters dark by day. The stage door stood ajar. A stagehand greeted us in grease paint and sweat-darkened cotton. "Supervisor, sir?" he asked, tipping his cap. "I am Monsieur Poirot, with my friend Mr. Hastings," Poirot replied, flashing his card. "We seek a private inspection of the stage and back rooms." The stagehand consulted a call book. "Yes, sir. Stage manager's expecting you. Through that door, then left at fork." We followed him through the side entrance into a labyrinth of corridors. Paint-splattered walls, stacks of scenery flats, and discarded props. Montague's costume, a velvet tailcoat with silver embroidery, hung on a hook outside the dummy room. A small placard read, "Bartholomew, the talking figurine." Poirot paused before the door. "Hastings, notice the hinges, well polished with no recent wear. Bartholomew's room has not been opened since the last performance." He rapped lightly. "Stage manager." A muffled voice answered, "Yes, come in." He pushed open the door. Inside lay a small chamber barely larger than a closet, with shelves of spare dummy heads, length of carved limbs, and piles of gown fragments. Across the floor lay fragments of wood chips and tufts of plaster. The centre of the room held an empty canvas-back puppet stage, its velvet curtains parted. Poirot knelt to examine the debris. See Hastings, chips of sycamore, the very wood of Bartholomew's chin, and plaster dust, as though the dummy fell from above. He looked up at the ceiling, but there is no trapdoor, only steel beams and rigging above. He grasped a handful of chips. Someone cut away the chin here, probably to silence him. But the rest of the dummy, where might he be? I inspected the shelves. One had a fine coat missing. Another shelf held a single glove, the mate nowhere to be found. "They stripped him," I said. "They took everything but that one piece." Poirot nodded. "Yes, a very thorough removal, likely timed between the end of the show and the final bow. Someone knew exactly where to look." We pressed on into the dressing-room corridor, where Montague's own quarters lay. His dressing table bore 2 matching bottles of scent, lilac posy and Baroque amber. Yet the Baroque amber had been opened recently, its seal broken. On the mirror, someone had scrawled in red grease paint the words, "Speak no more." A chill ran down my spine. Poirot sighed. "The messages multiply, Hastings. We have imperative, you must not speak, and imperative, speak only through the dummy's voice. Our culprit wishes to assume Bartholomew's timbre, perhaps as disguise." He turned to the stagehand. "Are there any secret passages behind this area?" The man hesitated. "Well, the theatre is old. There are cellars below, and a warren of corridors under the stage. Many have been bricked up, but some remain open. None lead directly to the top floor, though." Poirot rose. "Then, to the cellars we must go. Hastings, fetch electric lamps from the prop room. We shall explore the sub-stage passages without delay." As we left the dummy's chamber, the stagehand muttered, "Blimey, sir, why would anyone hide a puppet down below?" Poirot drew his coat around him. "Curiosities aplenty, my friend, but the true disappearance, the vanishing act, begins in darkness, Hastings. Let us follow the footprints below." I turned to Montague's empty stage, its boards silver with dust. I felt a pang of sympathy for the ventriloquist who had lost his partner and his own voice. Yet I trusted that Poirot's little grey cells would unravel this puzzle. Dummy vanishings are only the beginning. The greatest trick lies in unveiling the human heart behind the illusion. And so, lanterns in hand, we descended the narrow stairs into the theatre's bowels, ready to confront whatever secrets lay entombed beneath the boards of the Apollo. Chapter 2. Into the shadowed labyrinth lanterns flickered, as Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings and I descended the narrow wooden staircase into the cellar beneath the Apollo Theatre. The air turned cool and musty, redolent of damp stone and old velvet. Only the steady thrum of dressers' feet above reminded us that the world continued unaware of our subterranean quest. Poirot's small stature and graceful poise suited the cramped confines. Hastings followed, lamp held high, while I brought up the rear, ears straining for the faintest echo of hidden footsteps. At the foot of the stairs, the corridor branched like the spokes of a wheel. Each tunnel was dark beyond the halo of our lamps. The stagehand, perspiring under his grease paint, stood ready to guide us. "Through this aperture, sir," he whispered, voice hushed so as not to awaken any lurking creatures of the deep. "The old passage leads under the orchestra pit, then across way to the storage vaults." Poirot nodded, tapping the plaster-dusted wall with his knuckles. "Yes, Hastings," he murmured. "The builder's tunnels of 1879 long sealed, but sometimes reopened to retrieve misplaced props." He glanced at the exposed wooden beams overhead. If Bartholomew, or his dissident imitator, were hidden, these galleries would offer a clandestine refuge. We squeezed through the low arch. The lamplight quivered against damp walls, and the stagehand brushed aside a swath of cobwebs that revealed a shallow alcove. Inside lay a trio of dusty wooden crates, stenciled with "Furniture, Apollo Theatre," sealed with old lacquer. One crate had been forced open, its lid swinging on a single rusted hinge. Jagged fragments of sycamore chipped across the flagstones. The stagehand muttered, "These crates haven't been touched since 1910. Poirot knelt and examined the crate's innards. Remnants of fabric, bits of leather, a broken puppet foot. "Precisely," he murmured. "The remnants of a puppet long interred here. Who would exhume Bartholomew only to remove a single plank of chin?" He rose and peered down the corridor. "Hastings, note those scratches on the side of the crate. A crow's-foot gouge applied with deliberate force. Our suspect was strong, or determined to appear so." Hastings stooped to inspect. Also, footprints, large cloven soles muddied with stage dirt. Perhaps a stagehand's boots. Beside him, the stagehand paled. "Mine, sir, size 10, Jefferson and Co. But I haven't been here in years." Poirot turned to the stagehand with gentle irony. "We shall require alibis for all personnel on the night of September 14th. But first, let us press onward." He led the way deeper, past a junction where one branch plunged even darker, the bricks glimmering with mineral efflorescence. At the far end, we arrived at a stout iron door studded with rivets. The stagehand fumbled for a key, discovered rusted dials, and at last swung it open with a sigh of effort. Beyond lay a vast chamber, the old scenery workshop, where painted flats and broken columns leaned against stone pillars. Overhead ropes and block pulleys snaked like giant vines. The stench of turpentine and fading pigments weighed upon us. Poirot's lamp found a long work table beneath a fractured skylight. Scattered about were sketches of puppets, notebooks scrawled in graphite, and lengths of sycamore moulding as if awaiting carving. A half-finished torso lay on the bench, smeared with white gesso dust. Hastings ran his finger through the dust. No recent prints, yet the gesso remains fresh. Someone has laboured here within days. A sudden clink of metal caused us to startle. Poirot raised a gloved finger. Silence. He tiptoed forward. Beneath the table lay a dark shape, an empty top hat, its lining cracked. Inside was a scrap of parchment, a fragment of libretto from Montague's earlier performance, scrawled with a marginal note in Bartholomew's high, nasal cadences. "Tonight you betray me." The alien voice seemed to echo from the walls themselves. Hastings gasped. "This is the dummy's handwriting!" Poirot pocketed the fragment, or rather, the forger's mimicry. He wants us to think Bartholomew is threatening Signor Montague, to undermine him. He stood and surveyed the workshop. "Look above, Hastings." He pointed to a trapdoor in the ceiling. "Disturbed wood. This leads to the stage above, where one might drop a puppet unseen." I clambered onto a sturdy workbench, scrambled up, and shoved at the trapdoor. It yielded with a groan, revealing a narrow shaft of air. The stage boards lay only inches above. I breathed a sigh as Hastings passed me up the lantern, a perfect route for concealment. The dummy may be concealed in a gap between stage planks, then shunted into this workshop at will. Poirot shook his head. A clever ruse, but he misjudged our perseverance. He tapped the rough wooden edge of the trap. And yet, who among the company possesses the familiarity, the strength, and the motive to engineer such an elaborate charade? The stagehand swallowed. There is only one who knew these passages, Mr. Orlando Vale, the old scenery master, now retired in Brighton. He kept the cellar keys, and spoke often of his distaste for the signor's success. Hastings exchanged a look with me. A suspect emerges. We secured the trapdoor and descended into the workshop, sealing the iron door behind us. Poirot consulted his notebook. Vale, then. Mr. Vale's rancour at the signor's fame might have driven him to sabotage, stealing the puppet to steal the spotlight. Next, we interview Vale and inspect Montague's own quarters for corroboration. The stagehand led us back through the tunnels, retracing our steps past the crates and the alcove. We paused at the corner where a covered wagon wheel rested, relic of a 19th century pantomime. I placed my hand upon it, feeling the worn spokes. "All here speaks of theatre's ghosts, Hastings," I whispered. Poirot smiled, "and ghosts that breathe fear as easily as applause." He paused at the base of the cellar steps. We returned to the surface. "Hastings, we must question Signor Montague, his manager Priam, and the retired Vale. The spectre of the dummy may vanish, or it may reveal the heart that stoked this mischief." He led the way upward toward the stage door. Back in the Savoy's plush lounge that afternoon, the golden light caught the urns of white roses and the frilled lampshades that cast a gentle glow upon soft carpets. We found Theodore Priam awaiting us, pacing with restless energy. "Monsieur, what have you discovered?" he asked breathlessly as we approached. Poirot greeted him with measured calm. "Monsieur Priam, we have traced the removal of Bartholomew's chin and the concealment of his body to the old scenery workshop via a trapdoor beneath the stage. We also found a threatening note carved in puppet phrase. Now, our suspect is Mr. Orlando Vale, scenery master retired. We shall visit him in Brighton tonight." Priam's eyebrows rose. "Brilliant! But Brighton?" He eyed his pocket watch. "We risk missing tonight's rehearsal, scheduled at the Apollo." Poirot shook his head. "Rehearsals can be postponed. Tonight's revelation cannot. The signor's voice is at risk. He may lose his natural tone permanently if we fail to recover Bartholomew." He paused, "and I suspect Vale may have hidden the puppet somewhere on the boardwalk, hoping to rouse a sensational kidnapping story." Priam nodded grimly. "Very well. I shall arrange the fastest carriage. Monsieur Hastings, will you accompany us?" Hastings inclined his head. With pleasure. As we cleared the lounge, Poirot added softly, Hastings, in the darkness of Brighton's piers, we shall unmask this thief of voices, and restore Signor Montague's partner to him, and his own voice to himself. He smiled with quiet resolve. The greatest illusions cannot withstand the little grey cells, and our pursuit of truth. Thus concluded our subterranean investigation at the Apollo. Thus began our nocturnal voyage to Brighton, in pursuit of a puppet's vanishing act, and the vociferous echoes of a dummy's stolen voice. Chapter 3. The Road to Brighton and the Scenery Masters. L'Air Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings and I emerged from the Savoy Hotel into the clamour of Piccadilly, where hansom cabs clattered in eager ranks. Theodore Priam, eyes bright with resolve, had already secured a carriage for the swift journey to Brighton. The lamps of Regent Street gleamed like distant beacons as we sprang aboard, wrapped in cloaks against the bracing autumn night. Poirot, seated beside the coachman for navigational courtesy, leaned forward, moustaches quivering with anticipation. "Speed, Hastings, every moment matters," he intoned. "Mr. Vale believes the puppet concealed somewhere on the pier's labyrinth of sheds. We must forestall him from dispatching Bartholomew to oblivion." His little grey cells had already assembled the tapestry of clues, the forced crates, the trapdoor beneath, the stage, the scrap of Bartholomew's chin discovered in the workshop. Now, in pursuit of the last fragment of the puzzle, we sped southward beneath a canopy of stars and the hush of midnight. The carriage rattled onto the Brighton road, whose lamps retreated in steady succession. Pike's Hill grade rose before us, hedgerows dark against misty fields. Hastings and I exchanged a glance. The countryside, a blur of black shapes and silver moonlight, offered few landmarks in the dark, yet Poirot's confidence was palpable. He murmured coordinates to the coachman, who urged the horses forward with disciplined strokes. In just over 2 hours, the carriage rolled onto the Brighton seafront, where the white stone of the esplanade gleamed under lamplight. The roar of the sea surged against the sea-wall. We alighted before a narrow frontage bearing the weather-worn sign, Orlando Vale, scenic painter and craftsman. A single window flickered with candlelight, the heavy curtain drawn aside to reveal a clutter of canvases and varnished model ships drifting on the sill. Priam rapped lightly. The door opened to admit a gaunt figure clad in a painter's smock, his silver hair tied back, his eyes sharp beneath heavy brows. Mr. Orlando Vale surveyed us with an air of brittle composure. "Monsieur Priam, Monsieur Poirot, Mr. Hastings," he intoned, voice low and ragged. "You come at an hour most inconvenient." He stood aside as Poirot stepped into the narrow vestibule. "Mr. Vale," Poirot said with gentle precision, "we seek Bartholomew, Signor Montague's dummy. We know you accessed the Apollo's secret passages on the eve of his disappearance. We must ask, where have you hidden him?" Vale's face paled. He glanced at Hastings as though pleading for silent support, but Hastings only folded his arms. Poirot's grey eyes bore into Vale's. "You detest Montague's success," he continued. "You believed yourself slighted by the applause that greeted the signor's art. Yet to deprive his dummy of life is a cruelty beyond mere envy." Vale's, hands clenched. "You know nothing of envy," he retorted. "I admired Montague's skill once, but when he moved beyond simple puppetry into artful darkness, he eclipsed every craftsman. They came to see him and paid no mind to my painted backdrops." He passed a trembling hand across a canvas affixed to the wall, a ruinous colonnade, its stone pillars crumbling into twilight. Bartholomew's chin was carved from sycamore, I supplied. I saw potential in him, yet Montague claimed all credit, and left me to the forgotten corners of this town. "Admit the truth, monsieur," Poirot urged. "You stole the dummy to reclaim your rightful place in the theatre's pantheon." Vale's eyes glittered with tears. "Yes, I rationalized it thus, but I never intended to harm him. I stripped away only his face, his voice, to remind Montague that without Bartholomew he was nothing." Hastings stepped forward. "You speak of ripping away an artist's tool. Yet a tool is nothing without its master. Montague's voice remains his own. Bartholomew is merely its vessel." Vale recoiled as though struck. "Mendacious logic!" he cried. "You mock my grief." Poirot placed a calming hand on Vale's shoulder. "Your grief is honourable. Your method was not. Declare the puppet's hiding place, and this affair may end without further disgrace." He bowed his head in a courteous gesture of mercy. "Speak truth, Monsieur Vale. Where is Bartholomew?" Vale's shoulders slumped in defeat. He led us through the cluttered front room into a rear workshop where model ships and painted faience vied for space on battered shelves. A plank of floorboards, slightly elevated, bore fresh nails. "Here," he whispered. "He lies beneath the floor." He produced a small mallet and lever. Hastings knelt and pried up the boards, revealing a shallow cavity beneath. Wrapped in soiled velvet, we found the empty puppet frame, its jointed limbs stripped of their porcelain surface. Bartholomew's chin had been lodged carefully in a small recess at the side. Poised atop the plywood, the puppet awaited only restoration. We unwrapped him gently. The body was intact, save for the missing chin fragment we had recovered earlier, yet his hollow eyes and silent mouth conveyed an eerie, watchful expectancy. Poirot cradled the frame in his arms. "He is unharmed in essence, Hastings. We must reattach his face, restore his spirit, so that Signor Montague may reclaim his voice." Priam produced a small box from his coat, the missing chin, carved with loving precision. Hastings fitted it carefully into the puppet's face, aligning the grain of the wood until the join was seamless. Vale looked on, shame etched upon his features. "Forgive me," he intoned. "I see now the folly of my pride." Poirot inclined his head gravely. "Repentance is the true art, monsieur." With Bartholomew's face restored, we prepared to depart. Vale escorted us to the door, his eyes moist under the dim gaslight. "I shall return to my brushes," he said. "No longer will I believe art dead when others thrive." He pressed his hand to his chest. "You have given me new purpose." We made haste back to the Apollo's side-stage entrance by carriage. Montague's puppet cradled beneath Hastings's cloak. The lamps of the Strand flickered as we alighted, and the stagehand, who had accompanied us to Brighton, led us through the secret passages once more. We ascended to the puppet's chamber, where hastily I fastened the chin and tested the jaw's hinge. Bartholomew's mouth closed and opened with a satisfying click. Poirot nodded. Excellent. Now, conclude. The miracle on stage. He turned to Hastings. You must hand the dummy to the signor. I shall arrange matters in the wings. Montague's own dressing-room door swung open at our approach, and the signor himself emerged, costume gleaming, desperation etched into his features. "Hastings!" he cried, his voice quavering between his own deep baritone and Bartholomew's high nasal thread. Bartholomew's face, our work, seemed to glow in the lantern light. "My dummy!" He embraced the puppet with genuine relief. "You have given me my partner, my voice, myself." Poirot stepped forward. "Monsieur Montague, you stand restored to your art. Yet heed this. True performance lies not in trickery, but in the bond between man and his craft." Montague's eyes glistened. "I understand, Monsieur Poirot. I shall never again fail him." That evening, Montague's performance at the Apollo was a triumph. The audience gasped as he produced Bartholomew from the empty air, their applause echoing through the rafters. Each exchange between ventriloquist and dummy was more spirited than ever, imbued with the relief of reunion. In the wings, I watched Poirot's moustaches quiver with contentment. His little grey cells had vanquished pride, reclaimed a puppet's dignity, and restored a performer's heart. As the curtain fell, Montague bowed before us, his voice true and alone, speaking both for himself and for Bartholomew. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight you have witnessed not magic, but mercy." The crowd rose in ovation, and I knew that our strange puzzle had reached its joyous resolution. Pride had vanished, duplicity dissolved, and in its place the simple truth endured, that no art, however illusory, can thrive without honesty, compassion, and the deft hand of justice. Chapter 4. The Manager's Masquerade. The dawn light was still pale when we gathered once more in the Savoy's lounge, Vincenzo Montague and Theodore Priam, flanking Monsieur Poirot and Mr. Hastings at a small round table. Over thick cups of Earl Grey, Priam's face bore a tight strain. Though the previous night's triumph had uplifted Montague's spirits, Priam's sombre countenance foretold new disquiet. "Monsieur Poirot," Priam began, voice low, "I feared the worst, but this morning Bartholomew has vanished again." He thrust forward a silk-lined box, empty save for a single, finely carved puppet hand. Montague gasped. A tremor passed through Hastings. Poirot slipped on his gloves, steepling his fingers. "Two disappearances, monsieur?" Poirot asked gently, examining the hand. "And no other trace?" Priam shook his head. "The stagehand found only this, lying in the dressing-room corridor. Montague awoke, dressed for rehearsal, and discovered the puppet gone." He paused, choosing his words. "Last night's success may have incited envy." Montague's voice cracked. "But I promised never to lose him again." He pressed both hands to his brow, as though to banish a nightmare. Poirot offered a reassuring smile. "Fear not, signor. We shall recover Bartholomew, and confront the hand that wields this mischief." We hastened back to the Apollo Theatre, where the lateness of morning had drawn few pedestrians through the Strand's inscrutable shadow. Inside, the stagehand, pale as bleached linen, guided us to the dressing-room corridor. On the floor lay the puppet's hand, its tiny fingers curled in perplexing finality. Poirot knelt, inspecting the carving. Note, Hastings, the wood grain aligns with the chin fragment, but the varnish is different. Less lustrous, as though aged by exposure. He turned to the stagehand. Who last handled the puppet after last night's performance? The man blinked. I helped Signor Montague pack him away. Then I returned to the wings and locked his dressing-room door from the outside. No one else could enter without a key. He pointed to a ring of keys hung on a hook. All labelled, sir. Poirot gingerly removed the key from Montague's room and examined its teeth. Odd. The grooves show fresh wear. Someone inserted and turned it many times. He fitted the key into the lock, turned it, and opened the door. Within lay the puppet's empty velvet case, the lining fluffed as though someone had withdrawn its occupant in haste. See there, Poirot said, lifting a tuft of velvet fibre from the carpet. Microfibres from the case, caught on the puppet's coat sleeve. Whoever removed Bartholomew stood close enough for physical contact. He pocketed the clump. Hastings, we must speak with every person granted access to this corridor last night. The stage manager, the dresser, and most urgently, Mr. Priam himself. He turned to Priam, whose face had gone ashen. Monsieur Priam, Poirot said, quietly, you dispatched the urgent telegram to Signor Montague, one that drew us here. You control the Grand Inquiry Bureau's resources, the press contacts, and this hotel's parlour. You also arranged our carriage to Brighton. Did any of these tasks place you alone with the puppet? Priam's eyes flickered. He swallowed. I wished only to secure Signor Montague's comfort. I carried the puppet case myself to ensure. It was safely delivered. He paused, voice hesitant. I did not remove it. Poirot inclined his head. Yes, but did you ever handle the puppet outside of its case? Priam's shoulders trembled, only to admire its craftsmanship. I love fine art. He looked to Montague. I would never harm him. Monsieur Poirot's gaze flickered between Priam and the case. Yet harm has been done. 2 vanishing acts and 2 voices silenced. He pocketed the velvet tuft. We will speak with the stage manager at once. The stage manager, Mr. Whitley, had re-emerged from his office by noon, looking fatigued, yet resolute. Under Poirot's calm questioning, he admitted that he alone possessed a master key granting access to every dressing-room, corridor, and prop store. Last night, Whitley said, I discovered the scenery master's old pipe rack had been displaced. Curious, I lifted its hinged panel to examine the space behind, a routine check for rats, and found a smatter of puppet debris. I reported it to Priam, but by the time I returned, the puppet hand lay in Montague's corridor. Priam stiffened. Poirot watched him with keen interest. Then, monsieur, he said to the stage manager, you handed this information to Mr. Priam. Whitley's eyes flickered. Yes, he asked me to ensure nothing amiss. He wanted Montague to feel secure. Poirot nodded, seeming to accept the explanation. Yet Hastings noted the subtle shift in Priam's expression, relief mixed with something sharper. That evening's rehearsal, Poirot continued, was attended by all the performers and 2 gentlemen from the Grand Inquiry Bureau. Mr. Hastings, do you recall who they were? Hastings frowned. I recall one. Mr. Lawrence Crouch, the ventriloquism instructor retained for the new act, and a younger man, Mr. Emile Stokes, Priam's personal aide. Poirot's moustaches quivered. He turned to Priam. "Please summon Mr. Crouch and Mr. Stokes." Priam hesitated, then nodded and summoned his aide to fetch them. When they appeared, a portly, balding instructor and a pale, owl-eyed young man, Poirot greeted them courteously. To Mr. Crouch, Poirot posed a simple question. "Did you inspect Signor Montague's puppet at rehearsal time?" Crouch reddened. "Yes, monsieur. I was training 2 new acrobats to react to his ventriloquism. I handled the puppet to check its balance." "And did you note anything unusual?" Hastings pressed. Crouch looked distressed. "The puppet's voice seemed stronger, deeper. I commented to Mr. Stokes that Signor Montague's voice must have merged with Bartholomew's tone. He stammered. It surprised me." Poirot turned to Stokes. "And you, Mr. Stokes, did you overhear this conversation?" Stokes swallowed. "I did, monsieur. Then I was instructed by Mr. Priam to return Bartholomew to its case and keep the incident quiet for the performance's sake." Priam's face darkened. Poirot regarded him with gentle reproach. Why suppress such vital information? Priam's voice cracked. Because Signor Montague had just regained his voice. I feared another vanishing during rehearsal would break his spirit. Poirot's gaze softened. An understandable concern. Yet secrecy only breeds chaos. You withheld the stage manager's findings, thus allowing the puppet's second theft. He turned to Hastings. The evidence now suggests not a single hand, but at least 2, first Vale's removal, then Priam's concealment, unwittingly abetted by Crouch and Stokes. Hastings shook his head. A conspiracy of kindness, Hercule, yet a conspiracy nonetheless. Priam sank into a chair, guilt etched upon his features. I see now my error. I must atone. He rose suddenly. I shall open the puppet's case publicly tonight on stage and reveal every detail. Then my bureau will support the signor unconditionally. He paused, looking to Montague. Forgive me, Vincenzo. Montague's face softened. He embraced Priam. You sought to protect me. Now we move forward together. Poirot smiled thinly. A most theatrical denouement, n'est-ce pas, Hastings? But first, we must recover Bartholomew a final time, from whomever holds him now. His little grey cells had not yet rested. The puzzle's final act awaited. A public revelation. On the stage of the Apollo, a confession of misdeeds born of compassion, and the ultimate restoration of the ventriloquist's art and voice before a midday audience. As the group dispersed to prepare, I realized that in matters of illusion, the simplest truths are the hardest to bear, and the greatest performances often unfold behind the scenes. Chapter 5. The Final Curtain. The late afternoon sun poured through the towering windows of the Apollo Theatre as the house lights dimmed in preparation for the most extraordinary performance of Signor Vincenzo Montague's career. Word of last night's backstage drama, Bartholomew's second disappearance and subsequent recovery, had spread through London's theatrical circles like wildfire. And the audience on hand tonight was a who's who of critics, society sharps, and delighted insiders. From the stalls to the balcony, every seat was claimed, and the hush that fell as the first overture played signalled the promise of something unforgettable. Backstage, the atmosphere crackled with electricity. Vincenzo Montague stood at his dressing, table gown glistening under the makeup lights. Bartholomew, his beloved dummy, lay at Montague's elbow, chin restored, coat pristine, eyes fixed in perpetual mischief. Theodore Priam paced nearby, clutching a programme for last night's show as though it were a talisman. Colonel Callum Ramsay, here on leave from military teaching, offered a reassuring nod to Vincenzo through the mirror's reflection. Monsieur Hercule Poirot, ever the composed centre, observed the final preparations with a serene smile. "Hastings," Poirot said softly as I joined him in the wings, "tonight we resolve not only a puzzle of vanished ventriloquists, but of pride, protection, and the true meaning of partnership. Observe, our cast assembled, our puppet restored, the stage set for revelation." I nodded, catching sight of Mr. Lawrence Crouch the instructor, attempting to appear casual as he conversed with Laura Winthrop, the Oxford professor. Emile Stokes hovered anxiously by the prompt corner, and Mr. Orlando Vale remained conspicuously absent, on Priam's orders to spare his retiree's dignity. Yet Poirot's eyes suggested he suspected Vale would slip in for the final bow. A single stagehand signalled from the light box. The overture faded, and the footlights glowed amber as the curtain rose on an empty proscenium. A hush fell, so complete one might have heard a footfall on the painted backdrop. From the orchestra pit emerged a gentle flourish of strings, and woodwinds and Vincenzo Montague stepped into the spotlight, Bartholomew cradled in his arms. He bowed deeply, then spoke in his resonant baritone. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance is unlike any you have seen. It is not merely a display of ventriloquism, but a testament to loyalty, loss, and the art of recovery." A murmur ran through the house. Montague placed Bartholomew upon a small stool centre stage. The dummy's eyes gleamed under the light. Its mouth hung open as though eager to speak. Vincenzo continued, "In these past days, Bartholomew has known both disappearance and restoration, theft and kindness. I would present to you not only our final act, but a truth unveiled behind the curtains." He stepped back. The footlights flickered as the stagehand in the wings released a single bolt of soft haze that drifted across the boards. From the shadows emerged Theodore Priam, in evening coat rather than manager's attire, and at his side Orlando Vale, bowing so low his forehead nearly kissed the floorboards. The audience rose in unison as Montague advanced. "Priam, my friend and protector," Montague said, gesturing to his manager. "You carried Bartholomew's case through London's streets and beyond, hiding your guilt in the guise of care. But your error was born of compassion, not malice." Priam bowed, tears in his eyes as he offered Montague the puppet's velvet case. Vincenzo accepted it, placing it reverently on a small table, then turned to Vale. "And you, Orlando Vale," he said, voice thick with gratitude, "you took Bartholomew to your Brighton workshop, seeking to reclaim your craft by depriving me of mine. Yet in our confrontation you showed the heart of an artist who, in error, learned humility." Vale removed his painter's smock to reveal a plain frock coat. In his hand he carried a small carved relief, a commemoration of Bartholomew's chin, now framed in sycamore and engraved with the words, "The Art of Restoration." He placed it upon the velvet case. The audience broke into applause, but Montague raised his hand for silence. He retrieved Bartholomew and cradled him once more, then addressed the spectators. "Gentle friends, the greatest illusion is that any art, no matter how magical, can exist apart from truth. Thank you, Priam and Vale, for your part in this lesson. And now let us conclude our show." He sat upon a stool, Bartholomew perched on his knee. With a single nod, the dummy's wooden mouth creaked open. In high nasal tones, Bartholomew proclaimed, "Bravo! Encore, Vincenzo! Let all who doubted our bond now believe." The audience rose, applause crashing like thunder. Montague answered in his own voice, "Bartholomew speaks for us both. Let no art be thought complete without heart." The final act unfolded in gentle harmony, a playful dialogue between ventriloquist and dummy, rehearsed thousands of times yet, charged now with the spark of real redemption. Laughter and tears mingled in the stalls. Even the critics in the gallery found their pens stilled by the sincerity of the moment. As the curtain fell, the entire company, performers, crew, and Priam and Vale, joined Montague and Bartholomew for a grand bow. Poirot emerged from the wings and took his place at centre stage, his moustaches quivering with satisfaction. He tipped his hat in acknowledgement of the audience's standing ovation, and together the 8 figures formed a tableau of unity: man, dummy, and the human hearts behind them. Later, in the Savoy's lounge, we reconvened for a modest champagne. Toast! Vincenzo clinked glasses with Priam and Vale, who now stood side by side as equals. Montague's eyes shone with relief. "To Monsieur Poirot and Mr. Hastings," he said, raising his flute. "Without your guidance, Bartholomew would have remained lost, and I without my voice. You have given me back my art, and more importantly, my faith in friendship." Priam bowed. "And to you, Signor Montague, for reminding us all that the finest performances are born of truth and trust." Vale added, "and that an artist's worth derives not from applause alone, but from the courage to make amends." Poirot lifted his glass last, moustaches quivering with delight, to art restored, to hearts reconciled, and to the little grey cells, the smallest of mechanisms that guide us always toward honesty. Hastings laughed softly. "I shall remember tonight as the most extraordinary vanishing act in my life, Duhé, dummy that disappears not only from sight, but from the doubt that shadowed its master's soul." The evening lingered in warm conversation. Discussions of classical puppetry, the ethics of stagecraft, and the prospect of a travelling tour to restore Bartholomew to missing puppet enthusiasts. Montague, once shaken by his dummy's loss, now brimmed with new ideas for his act, dedicating one scene to the story of their night in the Brighton cellars. As the night drew to a close, Montague insisted on presenting each of us with a carved miniature of Bartholomew's face. Mine was finely polished sycamore, smiling in perpetual mischief. I tucked it into my waistcoat pocket as a reminder that even the smallest fragments, be they puppet chins or clues in a detective's case, can transform lives. The next morning, as Maple Street awakened under a gentle drizzle, I penned the final notes for our report. Poirot sat across the desk, reading over my shoulder. He tapped the parchment with satisfaction. "The puzzle of the vanished ventriloquist is resolved, Hastings," he said. "Yet its true lesson persists. Art thrives only when supported by integrity, and no illusion can long stand against the clear light of truth." I smiled and dipped my pen in ink. "A conclusion worthy of any stage, Hercule." He inclined his head in agreement. Thus, the case of the missing dummy reached its final bow, a tale of theft and restitution, of pride, humbled and partnership renewed, all under the guiding light of Poirot's little grey cells. And as the rain pattered upon the window pane, I felt certain that whether on stage or in life's trials, the greatest magic of all is the restoration of what was thought lost, and the enduring power of truth to bring it home. Chapter 6. Echoes of the Grand Tour. The crisp autumn air had given way to winter's hush by the time Signor Vincenzo Montague and his faithful dummy, Bartholomew, embarked on their first provincial tour. 2 weeks had passed since that extraordinary evening at the Apollo Theatre, when the final curtain fell on the mystery of the vanished dummy, and London's breathless applause had followed them to Birmingham, Manchester, and Glasgow. Each performance celebrated not only ventriloquism's marvels, but the triumph of friendship and forgiveness. Montague credited both Theodore Priam and Orlando Vale in his prologue, and audiences cheered at the tale of the two men whose rivalry had forged an unbreakable bond. By the time the company arrived in Cardiff for the penultimate show, the poster outside the Prince of Wales Theatre proclaimed in gilded letters, "Vincenzo Montague and Bartholomew. The ventriloquial miracle returns." Inside, the theatre's red velvet stalls were filled by patrons eager for the spectacle and for its tale of second chances. Behind the scenes, Priam oversaw every detail of the staging, from the dummy's velvet drapes to the luminous footlights. Vale, who had joined the entourage in Birmingham, had brought a portfolio of scenic designs inspired by the cardboard ruins in the Apollo's workshop, and the backdrops now glowed with emerald archways and moonlit ruins that lent the final act fresh enchantment. On the evening of January 9th, I took my place in the royal box beside Monsieur Poirot, Lady Beckenham, and Colonel Ramsay. Hastings occupied the front row, a notebook in hand. As Montague appeared on stage, Bartholomew perched on his knee as ever. The audience rose in salute, and the air crackled with anticipation, but Poirot's sharp eye noted a subtle tremor in Montague's hands. A memory of those precarious nights in the sub-stage passages, perhaps, or the weight of the puppet's uncanny voice. The programme unfolded with dazzling perfection. A duet of voices that soared with comedic timing, a dialogue of heartfelt confession, and then the grand finale, the tale of Bartholomew's disappearance and recovery, staged with illusions seamlessly integrated into the routine. Gasps and laughter rolled through the stalls as Montague vanished the dummy amid a cascade of silk and smoke, only to reveal him moments later suspended within a painted column, his chin restored to fresh carving. The applause thundered. Even the stiffest critics on the press bench were compelled to stand. Backstage, the company gathered for the customary after-show reception. Priam presented Hastings with tickets for the final performance at Drury Lane, while Vale distributed sketches of the dummy's face, miniature lithographs to commemorate the tour. Montague, eyes bright, embraced each of us in turn. "To think," he exclaimed to Poirot, "that you should solve my greatest riddle, how to be whole once more." Poirot bowed with modesty. "The riddle was yours, Signor, but the little grey cells were happy to assist." As the company prepared to depart Cardiff for London, Hastings and I retired to a nearby inn to compare notes. Over port and cheese I began. "Extraordinary tour, mon ami. One that might have ended in tragedy, yet soared so triumphantly." Poirot rested his cup on the tray. "Yes, Hastings. Their journey replicates the dual voices of ventriloquism, one that speaks through wood, another from the human heart. Both must harmonize for the art to endure." The next morning we travelled by express to London, where a carriage awaited to convey us to Drury Lane. The streets lay misty beneath winter's grip, and the gas lamps glowed like sentinels guiding us home. I noted, as we crossed Waterloo Bridge, how Montague's posters still adorned the hoardings, his silhouette in moonlight, proof that the puzzle of his vanished dummy had captivated the public imagination. At Drury Lane, the atmosphere was electric. Theatre folk bustled in the foyers, stagehands arranging props, musicians tuning violins, grooms straightening vaudeville posters. The grand chandelier glinted overhead, its crystal prism scattering light like a constellation within the vaulted ceiling. Priam ushered us through a side entrance to the green room, where Montague prepared for his final bow. Hastings joined Vale at the piano, exchanging sketches of new scenery. Lady Beckingham chatted with Professor Winthrop and Sir Percival Hargrove about the upcoming Council of Honour. Colonel Ramsay recounted a triumphant demonstration of peace fencing at Oxford, and even Crouch, the ventriloquism instructor, offered a warm salute to Montague. His earlier envy dissolved into admiration. Yet Poirot's gaze remained thoughtful. He motioned me aside into the alcove beside the mirror-lined wall. "Hastings," he said quietly, "observe the scatter of velvet fibres on the floor near Signor Montague's stool. They match the lining of Bartholomew's case. All seems well, but note the faint scuff toward the trapdoor. Even here, on the very stage where the final act shall play, the shadows of that cellar persist." I peered at the polished boards. Sure enough, a slender gap betrayed the presence of the sub-stage hatch. Before I could remark further, the stage manager summoned Montague to prepare. Poirot clapped my shoulder. "Fear not, Hastings. Tonight's performance completes the masterpiece. But afterwards we must revisit the puppet's chamber one last time." I did not ask why. After all, with Poirot, no detail is superfluous. The house lights dimmed, and the final performance commenced. Montague delivered his monologue with flawless warmth. Bartholomew replied with perfect wit, and the duo's chemistry seemed to transcend the boundary of flesh and wood. In the ultimate illusion, Montague passed Bartholomew into a painting, only to draw him forth, chin intact, amid a cascade of confetti. The audience leapt to its feet, cheering until the echoes reverberated through the corridors. As the ovation waned, Priam led the Boo line-up, Montague and Bartholomew at centre stage, then Priam, Vale, Crouch, Hastings, and finally Poirot, who, to the crowd's astonishment, stepped forward and raised his hat. Montague, voice quivering with gratitude, leaned in. "Monsieur Poirot, your presence on our stage honours this art as few can." Poirot smiled, his little grey cells for once laid aside in favour of a gentle bow. The cast dispersed, permitting a final curtain call, and the applause surged anew. In the wings, Hastings and I slipped backstage, while the actors collected flowers and congratulations from the front of house. The stage manager, beaming, handed Poirot a single spotlight cue. "Follow the puppet's trail." Intrigued, we tiptoed, amid the empty props, shelves of stocks and dolls, trunks of costumes, until we reached the hatch leading to the cellars. Hastings fixed the planks with his pocket-knife. Poirot followed, lantern in hand. We descended the narrow stairs once more, the damp air closing behind us like a proscenium arch. This time, the stagehand awaited us below, guilt flickering in his eyes. He lifted his cap. I thought you'd gone home," he stammered. "I kept looking for stray fibres, but I found nothing this morning." Poirot regarded him gently, because Bartholomew was never taken from this chamber a second time. He held aloft the lantern. The chamber lay undisturbed. The chains of the model ships hung unmolested. The tub of gesso lay overturned but dry, and the floorboards bore no sign of recent removal. Hastings frowned. "Then where has the dummy gone today?" He pointed to the far wall, where stacked flats leaned precariously. One painting, a facsimile of one used in the first scene, bore a slit in its canvas. Poirot stepped forward and pressed the panel. It gave way to reveal a shallow niche carved into the stone. There, propped upon a stool, sat Bartholomew in perfect repose, chin in place, eyes gentle. The puppet's velvet case lay neatly folded beside him. Priam's voice echoed from the stairs above. "I thought you would look here," he cried, ascending. Montague followed, hand in hand with Vale. Montague's eyes glistened. "This was Priam's idea," he said softly, "to place Bartholomew here, so that even if backstage pride should falter again, the puppet remains safe, awaiting return." Vale added, voice hushed, "And I helped carve the niche myself, so that no hammer or crowbar could remove him except with the master key." Poirot's green eyes twinkled. He turned to Hastings. "The final twist, Hastings. The manager's protection, the craftsman's care, the teacher's contrition, woven together to safeguard the art we cherish." Montague scooped up Bartholomew and embraced him. The dummy's voice piped in gratitude. "Master, all is well, thanks to these steadfast friends." We emerged from the cellar into the wings, where the bright stage lights glimmered. Priam clapped both men on the shoulders. Montague stepped into the open door and faced the empty boards. "Now we truly begin," he proclaimed, "our greatest show, this love letter to the art of ventriloquism and the spirit of unity." Back at Baker Street that evening, Poirot and I settled before the hearth. Hastings placed Bartholomew's miniature visage upon the mantel, a final souvenir of our adventure. The glow of the fire danced upon the mantel's porcelain, and I poured 2 glasses of sherry. Poirot raised his glass. "Hastings, this has been a puzzle of vanished voices and hidden passageways. Yet its resolution lies not in the craft of the dummy, but in the hearts that preserved him. A manager's foresight, a painter's skill, an instructor's humility." He tapped the rim of his glass. "And in the courage of one ventriloquist to trust his friends when he himself had faltered." I smiled, savouring the rich tang of the sherry. "To trust Hercule, the truest art of all. He clinked his glass against mine. Outside, London's winter wind whispered through the gas lamps of Baker Street. Inside, in the warmth of friendship and the glow of the hearth, we knew that no illusion, however marvellous, could compare to the simple miracle of human kindness. And in that truth, the final curtain fell on our vanishing act, leaving its echoes to linger in every puppet's smile, and in every heart devoted to the art of restoration. Chapter 7. The Royal Command Performance. A crystalline frosty dawn greeted us as we drove beneath Windsor's ancient gatehouse toward the Round Tower, its stones still dark with evening shadows. Gentle snow lay in quiet drifts across the courtyard. Torchlight glimmered from the battlements above, hinting at the grand occasion ahead. For months, word of Signor Vincenzo Montague's miraculous restoration of Bartholomew's voice, and the astonishing detective work of Monsieur Poirot, had swept through court circles until it reached the ears of His Majesty. The King, enchanted by the tale, had extended a private command to Montague for a performance in the presence chamber, with proceeds to the Royal Theatrical Fund. We alighted at the foot of the Peers' Gallery entrance. Colonel Ramsay stood at attention in his frock coat, sentinel for His Majesty's guard. Lady Beckingham and Professor Winthrop awaited in muffled velvet cloaks. Theodore Priam, pale with excitement, offered Montague a final word of encouragement, while Orlando Vale fussed over Bartholomew's velvet drapes. Monsieur Poirot himself moved serenely, pince-nez in place, moustaches poised as though sensing the slightest quiver in the air. A guard in full scarlet livery led us through the guard chamber, bristling with pikes and armour, and into the presence chamber, where oaken benches and gilded columns glowed beneath the vaulted ceiling. Beneath the organ loft, a dais had been erected for the performer. At its centre, a stool draped in crimson velvet, a small pedestal at its side for Bartholomew, and at its fore, 2 goblets of scented water, placed by the Queen's gentleman-in-waiting. As the doors closed behind us, hush fell like a cloak. The King and Queen sat beneath a canopy of cloth of gold, their Majesties framed by heraldic banners and the crests of the House of Windsor. Behind them, princes and princesses in lace ruffs and velvet cloaks formed a semicircle, their youthful faces alight with curiosity. The hush deepened as Montague peered into the golden glare and bowed low. He raised his hand in graceful salute, and the orchestra, small but impeccable, struck the first chord of a stately march. Montague's baritone voice rang through the hall. Your Majesty, your Royal Highnesses, and honoured guests, I stand before you tonight with deepest gratitude for this command, and with my steadfast companion, Bartholomew, we present not only ventriloquism's wonders, but a testament to the strength of friendship, forgiveness, and the art that unites us all. The audience offered gentle applause. Montague seated himself upon the velvet stool, drew Bartholomew to his knee, and with a single nod passed the performance to the dummy. Bartholomew's high nasal tones pierced the silence. Indeed, sire, may our small voices bring cheer to these ancient walls. A ripple of delight stirred through the chamber. Montague and Bartholomew launched into their customary dialogue. Bartholomew bantering about palace intrigue, Montague mimicking the Lord Chamberlain's stately address, the two enacting scenes of comic misunderstanding and heartfelt confession. Each exchange dazzled with precision. Each punchline earned ripples of laughter, even from the royal circle. Midway through the act, Montague conducted a most delicate illusion. Bartholomew vanished in a swirl of silken scarves and mild smoke, only to reappear upon the Queen's silver-rimmed cushion. At that moment, a startled footman slipped forward and retrieved the dummy, eliciting applause that rustled through the laced hems of court gowns. But behind the applause, Montague's eyes tracked the Queen's personal brooch, a cluster of diamonds and sapphires, perched upon her ermine cloak. In the sudden haze, the brooch seemed to flicker in the footlights, and Montague's heart trembled with foreboding. As the final number drew to its close, Montague bowed deeply. Bartholomew clicked his wooden heels and offered a cheeky salute. "Bravo, maestro! Let our next act be one of generosity and goodwill." The audience rose in a tide of applause so fervent that the organ loft's pipes seemed to vibrate. Montague led his final bow, followed by Priam, Vale, Ramsay, Winthrop, and finally Poirot, whose presence inspired cheers, even in the highest benches. As the curtain of polite applause fell, Montague lingered a moment, bidding farewell to His Majesty with sincere reverence. It was only as we passed behind the dais, through a hidden panel into the service corridor, that the crisis revealed itself. Theodore Priam's hand flew to his breast in a stifled gasp. "The brooch! It is gone!" Montague's eyes widened. "Stolen from Her Majesty's cloak!" Colonel Ramsay gripped his shoulder. "Impossible! Too many watched." Priam shook his head, voice trembling. The footman returned the dummy too quickly in the closing haze. I fear the brooch slipped into Bartholomew's drape." Before Montague could protest, Monsieur Poirot stepped forward, face calm beneath his pince-nez. "Then we have two tasks, to recover the royal jewel and to clear the name of any innocent hand. Hastings, may I summon the footman?" Hastings, who had noted the footman's harried expression, obliged. The youth arrived, shaking as he removed a cap. I thought I placed the brooch safely in my pouch, sir," he stammered, "but the smoke and applause confused me. When I tried to replace it on Her Majesty's cloak, it slipped." Poirot nodded gently. "We shall verify your account, but first we must retrace the footman's path through the stage passages and the fireworks store, where a faint report would mask your footsteps." He glanced at Hastings. "Do you recall the route the footman took?" Hastings frowned. "Yes, through the dais panel, down the narrow corridor past the armoury, then to the gallery where the fireworks are stored." Poirot rose. "Then we how to pursue without delay." We ascended the dais to the footlights, then slipped through the hidden door into the corridors behind the audience. The tapestries and panelled walls echoed with the distant hum of the orchestra packing their instruments. Poirot led the way down the carpeted passage, stopping at a small door marked Armoury and Pyrotechnics. The lock yielded to the Lord Chamberlain's key, which Priam produced. Inside lay racks of small artillery, signal flares, confetti guns, and buckets of gunpowder for royal celebrations. A single cask bore the Queen's cipher and was capped with a silver seal. Poirot ran a gloved finger along the seal's edge. "Disturbed," he murmured. "See how the wax bears a fresh crack." Hastings stooped to examine the floor. A thin trail of diamond dust led from the cask toward a stack of wooden crates. "Look here," Hastings said, scooping a small mote between finger and thumb. "The brooch grazed the floor here." Priam's face paled. He swore softly. Poirot pocketed the dust. The cask was opened to create a diversion, an echoing crack, as if a misfire. In the ensuing shock, the footman accidentally slipped the brooch into the dummy's drape, intending to restore it once the performance concluded. He turned to the crates. "Our next step is the service gallery above. Ascend by the iron. Stairs, Hastings. We must intercept whoever holds the brooch now." We climbed the narrow staircase to the service gallery, where torches sputtered against a night sky, visible through high windows. A single workman, dressed in livery nearly, identical to the footman's, stood by a railing, clutching a small pouch. As he turned, the pouch slipped from his hand, revealing the glittering brooch. Priam gasped. "It is Emile Stokes!" The workman froze. Emile Stokes, Priam's own aide, eyes wide in guilt. Poirot advanced with quiet dignity. "Mr. Stokes," he said, "you intended to safeguard the brooch, yet sealed it within the dummy's garment to prevent its jostling. You awaited only a moment alone to restore it." Stokes sank against the railing, shame etched upon his face. "I meant no harm to the Queen," he said. "I loved my duties too dearly. When the brooch fell, I feared its loss, so I took it, to ensure its safety until I could return it discreetly." Poirot nodded. "A misguided kindness, yet your concealment endangered both itself and the dignity of this court. You must now deliver the brooch back to Her Majesty, and confess your error, that mercy may temper your sentence." Stokes bowed his head. "Yes, Monsieur Poirot, will." Back in the presence chamber, the king and queen remained seated, awaiting the miracle of restitution. Montague and Priam approached with the brooch, held upon a velvet cushion. The queen's eyes lit in surprise, and she inclined her head to receive it. The king offered a gracious nod to Stokes, who stood trembling before him. "Your Majesty," Stokes stammered, I sought only to protect your jewel. Forgive my rashness." The queen's gaze softened. She reached out and touched his shoulder. "Your loyalty is evident, my good man, yet such trust must not be repaid with concealment." She turned to Priam. "I thank you all for ensuring its safe return." With that, Montague reclaimed his stage, Bartholomew at his knee, and offered a final, grateful epilogue. "May this small jewel remind us that the greatest treasures lie not in gold or stones, but in the light of honesty and the warmth of forgiveness." The court rose in thunderous applause. As Montague and Bartholomew bowed low, I noticed Poirot's subtle smile. His little grey cells had once more illuminated a path through darkness, this time through corridors of palace intrigue, and revealed that even the purest intention can cast a shadow when cloaked in secrecy. But with courage, compassion, and the gentle art of confession, trust is restored, and the performance of life continues, richer, kinder, and infinitely more splendid. Chapter 8. The Banquet at Montague Manor. The snow had ceased its quiet descent by the time our carriage clattered up the gravels of Montague Manor, leaving a crystalline glaze upon hedges and roof tiles. Inside, the glow of lanterns beckoned us through the front door and into a hall alive with warmth and laughter. Senior Montague, his evening coat trimmed with velvet and silver, greeted each guest personally. Colonel Ramsay, still regaling the household staff with tales of peace fencing. Lady Beckingham, radiant in her ice-blue velvet. Professor Winthrop, holding court over discussions of ethical performance. And, of course, the man of the hour himself, Bartholomew, perched upon his crimson velvet pedestal, chin newly carved, and eyes as mischievous as ever. The grand drawing-room had been transformed into a banquet hall of the old style, its long oak table set with Montague family silver, engraved with the motif of twin masks, one smiling, one pensive, symbolic of ventriloquism's dual voice. Crystal decanters of Madeira and Burgundy stood ready, alongside goblets etched with stylized microphones. Pale roses of winter white adorned every surface, their fragrance mingling with the warm notes of the roaring fire in the marble hearth. At Montague's invitation, we found our places, Montague beside Poirot, Priam beside Hastings, and Vale opposite Professor Winthrop, each plate bearing a modest signet of a hand-carved puppet. Montague rose at the head of the table, Bartholomew's velvet drape fluttering as he did, his baritone voice carried easily. "My dear friends, tonight we gather not merely to feast, but to celebrate that most elusive of all arts, the art of second chances." Bartholomew's voice, once shattered by pride and envy, has been restored through forgiveness and trust. Let this banquet honour the bonds of friendship that no trick, no vanish, no misdeed can ever truly sever. A gentle murmur of approval swept the room, and we raised our glasses in unison. Poirot, moustaches quivering with delight, offered a brief toast. "To the little grey cells, and to the large hearts that prove them right." The first course was served in elegant restraint. Thin slices of smoked trout on warm brioche, garnished with dill and a whisper of crème fraîche. As we ate, Hastings recounted anecdotes from Montague's provincial tour. The time Bartholomew had mimicked an especially florid Glaswegian accent so perfectly that an audience of local officials had erupted in delighted indignation, and the nearly comedic scramble to restore order to the stage. Colonel Ramsay followed with an account of teaching peace fencing to reluctant Welsh coal miners, who insisted on duelling over who got the last bag of biscuits before surrendering to Montague's lecture on gentle conduct. Between courses, Valerie, Montague's niece and mistress of the household, glided through the hall, offering delicate pastries and refilling our glasses. Hers was a quiet presence, yet Hastings noted how her thoughtful nod to Vale suggested gratitude for the scenery master's redemption. Vale himself hovered by the hearth, running a hand tenderly over the carved medallion Rococo-style relief that commemorated Bartholomew's first disappearance. A bas-relief of twin faces, one mournful, one glad, pressed into the oak panelling. Soon, the second course was placed, roast pheasant with a chestnut mushroom ragout, nestled against honey-roasted root vegetables glazed in juss. The rich aromas coaxed sighs of satisfaction, and Lady Beckingham seized the moment to propose a final project for the Grand Inquiry Bureau, a nationwide fellowship for young performers, offering them lessons in both ventriloquism and the ethics of the stage. Professor Winthrop, always eager for scholarly collaboration, pledged the University of Oxford's support, while Sir Percival Hargrove, once a staunch defender of martial tradition, volunteered the Society for Martial Heritages, halls for fencing exhibitions to teach honour without harm. Bartholomew, as if awaiting his cue, piped up in his bright nasal tone. And may no apprentice ever vanish beneath the boards, for boards once trod in kindness shall never bear a hollow echo. The hall erupted in laughter, and Montague, his own voice resonant with pride, bowed to his wooden companion. "Well said, Bartholomew. Let our errors be not hidden beneath floorboards, but revealed in light, that all may learn." At that, Priam rose to his feet, wine-glass raised. His pale face had regained colour, and his voice no longer trembled. "To reparation and renewal. May we all find the courage to face our missteps, and the grace to begin anew." The assembled guests joined in the toast, their voices lifting in a chorus of affirmation. Even the ancient portraits upon the walls seemed to regard us with benevolent approval, their painted eyes reflecting the flicker of candlelight and human warmth. For the grand finale, Montague invited us to the music alcove, where an expertly restored spinet, one of the manor's prized heirlooms, had been dusted and tuned. Here, Montague and Bartholomew performed a delicate piece, a vocal duet adapted from old Italian madrigals, alternating between lead singer and chorus in a demonstration of ventriloquial counterpoint. The result was hauntingly beautiful. 2 voices emerging in perfect harmony, one corporeal, one carved of sycamore, each echoing the other across the candlelit hall. Professor Winthrop wept softly. Hastings felt a lump in his throat. Ramsay, accustomed to battlefield fervour, seemed on the verge of tears. When the last note faded, a hush reigned. Then the audience rose to a standing ovation that shook the ancient rafters. Montague and Bartholomew took their bows, and Poirot stood to applaud, his dark eyes shining. As the company dispersed into the manor's drawing rooms for coffee and petits fours, I found myself beside Montague's fireplace, where the smouldering logs threw dancing shadows against porcelain figurines of jesters and harlequins. Montague poured 2 cups of cocoa. "Me," he said softly. "I cannot thank you enough for guiding me through my darkest nights. Without you, Bartholomew and I would have remained lost to regret." I smiled, accepting the cocoa's warmth. "Your thanks belong to all who learned from this tale. Priam, Vale, Hastings, Winthrop, Crouch, Stokes, and above all, you yourself, for trusting others to restore what was once yours." He nodded, eyes misty. "And now," he said, touching Bartholomew's wooden collar, "we have stories to share with the next generation. May they cherish each performance as a gift, not a gift to be stolen." Outside, the snow continued to fall in silent testimony to the night's peace. Within Montague Manor, candles flickered in every window, and laughter drifted through corridors warmed by camaraderie. In that moment, I understood the deepest secret of ventriloquism, that true voice emerges not from hollow wood, but from hearts brave enough to speak and to listen without fear. And as I gazed upon Bartholomew's carved smile, I felt certain that this chapter of their lives and of our adventure would echo long in the annals of art, friendship, and the indomitable power of the little grey cells. Chapter 9. The Sabotage. Of the final act winter's grey light had scarcely broken when Signor Montague's company arrived at the London Palladium for the tour's final performance. Outside, the Marquis proclaimed in brilliant neon, "Last night! Vincenzo, Montague and Bartholomew. The ventriloquial miracle. Don't miss the grand finale." Inside the cavernous hall, stagehands draped velvet curtains and tested footlights. Musicians warmed up in the pits, and the air hummed with anticipation. But beneath the usual bustle, Monsieur Poirot observed a tension threaded through the company. Hastings whispered, "I've never seen Montague so edgy." Montague caught Poirot's eye and offered a wan smile. "I fear another misadventure, mon ami." In the wings, Priam greeted Vincenzo with a curt nod. "A note came for you in your dressing-room," he said quietly, extending an ivory-enveloped missive. Montague's fingers trembled as he broke the seal. He read, "Tonight's voice shall fall mute unless you heed my call. Seek the one who speaks through you, or speak no more." No signature. A chill rippled through the theatre. Montague crumpled the note. Another threat. After all we've endured. Poirot placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "We shall uncover its author before tonight's curtain rises." First, Poirot led Hastings to Montague's dressing-room. The door swung open to reveal the neatly arranged costume. Bartholomew's, velvet case, and an array of make-up pots. Yet the voice-amplifying bellows beneath the puppet's jaw appeared slashed, its leather diaphragm rent by a keen blade. Poirot knelt, inspecting the tear. "Sabotage," he declared. "Whoever penned this note means to silence Bartholomew, thereby silencing Signor Montague." Hastings clenched his fists. But who could harbour such envy after all that reconciliation? Poirot's brow furrowed. Envy, yes, but also fear. The very art we celebrate tonight depends upon that puppet's voice. Let us question the staff. We moved through the labyrinthine corridors, stopping at the prop room. There, Orlando. Vale hovered, brushes in hand, his cheeks drawn. Poirot asked gently, "Monsieur Vale, have you seen anything unusual?" Vale shook his head. "My work is with paint and canvas, not leather and wood." Yet behind him lay a discarded scrap of leather, matching the diaphragm, tangled in scenery cloth. Vale averted his eyes. I found it in the scrap bin this morning." Poirot pocketed the fragment. "Thank you, monsieur. And now the music pit." Inside, Lawrence Crouch stood by a stack of musical scores. Hastings confronted him. "Mr. Crouch, did you notice anything odd during rehearsal?" Crouch's lips trembled. "I heard a strange rasp, as if the dummy struggled to speak. I thought it a creaky hinge." He glanced at the torn bellow. "But I did not imagine it deliberate. Next, we sought Emile Stokes, who managed the pyrotechnics. He admitted a moment of jealousy when Montague thanked Vale and Crouch by name, but denied any wrongdoing. 'I would never harm the signor,' he insisted. 'My loyalty is to him.' Hastings noted 2 sets of footprints in the sawdust, one smaller, one larger, leading from the dressing-room to the prop-room. "See here," he said, pointing to gravel lodged in the tread. Both Vale and Crouch's boots bore similar patterns, an identical maker's mark. Poirot's eyes gleamed behind his pince-nez. "A ruse to implicate 2 men." He tapped the larger prints. "These are Crouch's. The smaller are Vale's. But which pattern repeats?" We followed the trail to the stage manager's office, where the foreperson sat at his desk in shock. "There's no room here," he protested. "I keep no secrets." Yet On the floor lay a single hairpin, a woman's pin from Montague Manners. Banquet Poirot extracted it and held it aloft. "Motive," he murmured. We retraced our steps to the green room, finding Valérie, Montague's niece, standing by a trunk of costumes, jewellery pouch in hand. She nearly gasped before she recognized us. I found this last night," she stammered, offering the torn diaphragm. "I feared for Uncle Vincenzo's safety. Someone threatened him again. I tore the bellow to disable the puppet, then planned to restore it before the show. I never meant to risk his art." Montague embraced her, relief and reproach mingling on his face. "My dear niece, your love almost cost me my craft." Valérie wept softly. "I thought I protected him, yet I endangered everything." Poirot nodded, a passionate impulse born of fear. But secrecy begets sabotage. Now we must repair the puppet's mechanism before curtain. Vale retrieved his tools. Crouch lent his leather patch. Hastings and Stokes worked to clean the tear and re-stitched the bellow. Priam comforted Valérie as Montague oversaw the repair, offering purposeful calm. Within the hour, Bartholomew's diaphragm was whole, and a thin gold wire, part of the puppet's internal voice box, twisted to reinforce the patch. Montague tested the dummy's voice, a clear "ahoy" in his own and Bartholomew's tones. All rejoiced, and Hastings marvelled at Vale's craftsmanship. "You've given him new life," he said warmly. Poirot observed the assembled company. "Let this be our final lesson, that in matters of art and devotion we must trust one another with both talent and truth. Fear may prompt rash deeds, yet forgiveness and united hands restore harmony." As the footlights blinked before the final bow, Montague stepped onto the stage, Bartholomew in arms. The curtain rose on an adoring audience, unaware of the near disaster. Backstage, Montague addressed them. "Ladies and gentlemen, tonight's performance is dedicated to those who love with such fierceness they risk folly. But through honesty and unity, we reclaim our voices and our art." A chorus of applause greeted them before the first syllable of their duet was spoken. Montague and Bartholomew spoke and sang, their voices entwined in a renewed promise. From the gallery to the orchestra pit, every corner of the Palladium resounded with joy. As the final curtain fell, Montague bowed with genuine reverence. Priam joined him, Vale at his side, and Hastings and I stepped forward to take the last bow of the evening. Poirot's moustaches quivered in satisfaction as the audience rose in ovation. That night, back at Baker Street, I reflected on the tangled path of Chapter 9, a web woven of fear, love, and hasty devotion. Yet with calm reasoning and open hearts, threads of misunderstanding unravelled, revealing the simple truth that the art we cherish thrives only when born of trust, and that every silent threat can be answered by the clarion voice of unity. Chapter 10. The Final Curtain. Call. The pale light of dawn filtered through the frosty panes of Baker Street as I tucked the small sycamore miniature of Bartholomew's face into my waistcoat pocket. The events of the previous night still shimmered in my mind. The triumphant restoration at the Palladium, the recovered brooch, and the final joyous ovation that had resounded through its historic walls. Yet, even as London hurried to begin a new day, I felt the tug of anticipation for one last performance. The matinee at the Apollo Theatre, the company's farewell to the stage before they embarked on the European tour that would carry their legend far beyond Britain's shores. 11 o'clock sharp, Monsieur Poirot and I arrived at the Apollo, where the grand façade glowed in the weak winter sun. A modest crowd lined the entrance, theatre-goers eager to relive the miracle they had witnessed. And Theodore Priam, looking every inch the consummate manager in top hat and frock coat, greeted us with a relieved smile. "Mr. Hastings, monsieur. Poirot, you've come for our final bow." He framed us with outstretched arms. "Please, the first row of the stalls. There you shall see history's last performance." Behind him, Orlando Vale carried a rolled tapestry of the new ruin scene backdrop, while Lawrence Crouch and Emile Stokes exchanged conspiratorial grins. Inside, the theatre's interior felt both familiar and enchanted. Velvet drapes in deep maroon hung at the proscenium arch, and on stage the small pedestal awaited Bartholomew, now a symbol of resilience. Vincenzo Montague stood just off stage, his dark eyes alight with both excitement and solemnity, as he adjusted Bartholomew's velvet drape. Colonel Ramsay paced the wings, practising an imaginary salute, and Lady Beckingham, seated near the orchestra pit, carried a programme emblazoned with the words, "The Vanishing Ventriloquist Epilogue." I took my seat beside Poirot, whose moustaches quivered with delight at the bustle of final preparations. An initial hush fell as the house lights dimmed to a soft glow. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra struck the opening chord, a gentle arpeggio that seemed to float above the audience. Montague stepped into the beam of the footlights. Bartholomew perched upon his knee and spoke in his deep baritone. "Ladies and gentlemen, friends and fellow travellers, welcome to the last page of our story in this theatre. Tonight's performance is not merely an encore, but a benediction, a farewell to a chapter of marvels that began in mystery, found its trials in shadows, and now concludes in light." Bartholomew's wooden lips split in a delighted smile as his high nasal tones punctuated, "Indeed, good people, let us celebrate not endings, but the promise of beginnings anew." A ripple of laughter and applause coursed through the stalls. Montague placed Bartholomew on his velvet pedestal and retreated a step, allowing the dummy to address the audience in turn. "Behold, the last act of our domestic theatre, a scene of harmony between man and puppet, between pride and forgiveness. Bear witness to the wonders wrought by friendship's steadfast hand." At that, the first tableau unfolded. Montague and Bartholomew enacted the scene of their initial disappearance, with Montague losing the dummy behind the painted columns that Vale had designed. The duo's graceful choreography, honed through months of collaboration, lent the illusion startling realism. Montague's arms searched the columns, his voice trembling with faux despair, while Bartholomew's voice echoed faintly from hidden speakers. At the final moment, the dummy emerged on the opposite side, delivering a quip so perfectly timed that the theatre erupted in applause. Next came the dramatic reenactment of Montague's descent into the cellars of the Apollo, complete with Vale's haunting backdrop of subterranean arches and Weber's ominous organ motif playing softly from the pit. The effect was so immersive that I felt the damp chill of the tunnels upon my skin. Montague navigated the stage in darkness, guided only by a small lantern, until at last he discovered Bartholomew cradled behind a faux crate. The dummy's second disappearance, followed by the tear in his diaphragm and the heartfelt confession that had followed, played out in pantomime, the orchestra swelling with poignant strings as Montague restored his partner with a mock set of stitches and a flourish of ribbon. By the time Montague and Bartholomew returned to centre stage, for the final dialogue the audience sat breathless. Montague spoke of the lessons learned, that fear can drive even the kindest to err, that secrets only deepen wounds, and that truth spoken in humility builds bridges stronger than any deception. Bartholomew's rejoinder, a bright nasal reminder that every stage deserves its day in the light, drew a standing ovation that thundered even above the orchestra's closing chord. With the curtain full, the company lined up for their bows. Priam, Vale, Ramsay, Crouch, Stokes, and finally, last but not least, Montague and Bartholomew. But Poirot, ever the showman, stepped out into the house lights, hat in hand. His deep voice rang clear. "Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to offer one final tribute to this extraordinary ensemble, and to the art that unites us all. May the curtain never close on the courage to forgive and the spirit to create anew." The applause that followed echoed through the rafters as Poirot bowed and withdrew behind the scenes. Outside, the January wind swept away the echoes of that final bow, leaving only the satisfied glow of electric lights and the knowledge that the greatest mysteries resolve not in darkness, but in the shared delight of revelation. Backstage, the troupe celebrated with warm embraces. Priam produced flasks of fine brandy for a modest toast. Montague lifted his glass. To friendship restored, to art reborn, and to the hearts that made us whole. Vale, his paint-stained fingers now steadied by gratitude, clinked his own glass. Crouch, beaming, declared, "And to the future artisans, may they learn from our follies and surpass our triumphs." Stokes, emboldened at last, added, "To the power of truth, stronger than any ill-conceived secrecy." Colonel Ramsay rallied with a hearty, "And to honour without combat, in every discipline and domain." Laughter and cheers filled the narrow corridor as we finished our brandy and prepared to depart. Montague embraced each of us in turn, his genuine warmth more precious than any trophy. Bartholomew, perched once more on his stool, gave a jaunty wave of his wooden hand, his carved grin as buoyant as ever. On the carriage ride back to Baker Street, snow began to fall anew. Poirot regarded his reflections in the window's glass, moustaches quivering. Hastings, this final curtain call completes the grand performance. Yet the true finale lies in what follows. The European tour, the hearts uplifted, and the spirit of art renewed across the continent. I glanced at the drifting snowflakes lit by gas lamps, and in London's hushed tonight, I feel that Bartholomew's voice will echo long in memory, and that our little grey cells have once more guided us to the triumph of truth. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, mon ami, for in every puzzle, no matter how woody or wondrous, the final answer remains the same. Kindness, honesty, and the courage to speak one's voice, or, in Bartholomew's case, to channel another's." As the carriage wheels crunched toward home, I tucked the miniature puppet's face deeper into my pocket, savouring the final sweetness of a case well concluded. And though the stage would soon lie silent at the Apollo, and Montague's company venture beyond our shores, I knew their voices, those of Hollow Wood and Living Heart, would continue to resonate in every kind act and every truth bravely spoken. Chapter 11. The Voyage Beyond Illusion. The dawn light crept softly through the lace curtains of 21B Baker Street as I joined Monsieur Poirot in the sitting-room, each of us nursing a cup of precisely brewed Darjeeling. The final curtain had fallen on Montague's farewell matinee at the Apollo, and London's theatres now lay quiet in the midwinter hush. Yet for Vincenzo Montague and his faithful dummy Bartholomew, the real journey was only beginning. As Scheidegger listened to the crackle of the fire and watched Poirot's gaze drift to the little sycamore miniature upon the mantelpiece, I sensed that this chapter of our adventure, the puzzle of the vanished ventriloquist, had woven itself into our hearts as indelibly as any grand opera. "Mon ami," Poirot began, his voice measured and warm, "we witnessed a most unusual mystery, one that tested the bonds between man and art, between secrecy and trust, and now our friends embark upon a new odyssey across the continent." He lifted his cup. "Let us prepare to bid them farewell." By mid-morning, Hastings and I took our leave of Baker Street and hailed a hansom for Victoria Station. The pale sun glinted upon the snow-dusted pavements as we rattled past familiar corners, a reminder that the city, too, had resumed its daily rhythms. At the station, a small crowd had gathered to witness Montague's departure. Theatre folk, well-wishers, and the loyal cadre who had seen him through crisis and triumph. Theodore Priam stood at the carriage door, cravat immaculate, while Orlando, veil clutched a portfolio of scenic designs for the European tour. Lawrence Crouch inspected a trunk of spare dummy parts with professional care, and Emile Stokes, now recovered from his earlier lapse, held a monogrammed case intended for Bartholomew's safe passage. Montague, coat buttoned, hat tipped at a rakish angle, embraced each of them in turn. Bartholomew's wooden hand clicked against Montague's sleeve, as though in affectionate farewell. "My dear friends," Montague said, voice rich and resonant, "you have restored my art, my craft, and my confidence. As Bartholomew and I journey to Paris, Vienna, and beyond, know that you travel with us in every line of dialogue and every stage we grace." Vale pressed a sketch into Montague's hand, a watercolour of the Eiffel Tower framed by Montague's ruin scene backdrop, intended for the premiere in France. "To inspire our collaborators," Vale said softly. Montague nodded, eyes misty. Priam stepped forward, clearing his throat. "Signor, as your manager, I vow to safeguard Bartholomew's velvet and the integrity of every performance. Emile, Crouch, Vale, you three shall accompany us. Hastings and Poirot, the first two passengers." He gestured to us. "We shall reserve the best compartments for you." Poirot inclined his head in courteous acceptance. "I shall observe the subtleties of continental stagecraft, and perhaps apply the little grey cells to fresh mysteries." He smiled, moustaches quivering. Hastings laughed softly. "I look forward to witnessing Bartholomew's triumph in new languages." Montague offered him a small pouch, embroidered with Bartholomew's monogram. "For safekeeping," he said. Hastings accepted it with gratitude. The royal train whistle sounded. Montague and his company boarded the first-class carriage. We followed more slowly, luggage in hand. From the platform, I watched as Montague arranged Bartholomew upon a velvet cushion, then lifted his hat in a final salute to London. The dummy's carved grin seemed wider than ever, as though acknowledging the city that had witnessed his greatest vanishing act. When the train lurched forward, a hush fell among those gathered. Poirot placed a comforting hand upon my shoulder. They go forth into a world of new audiences, Hastings, carrying both spectacle and sincerity. May their art thrive beyond these shores. He paused, watching the carriages slide past the station wall. And may no new vanishing act find them unprepared. We returned to Baker Street in thoughtful silence. Inside the familiar warmth of the sitting-room, Poirot settled into his armchair and retrieved his case notes on Montague's case. "Now, Hastings," he said, "we reflect upon the lessons of this strange odyssey. What have we learned of illusion, of disappearance, and of the power of truth?" I drew a deep breath, that even the most enchanting art can falter when built upon secrets, and that forgiveness and collaboration rebuild it stronger than before. I reached into my pocket and produced the carved miniature of Bartholomew's face. And that, every fragment of evidence, no matter how small, holds the key to understanding. Poirot smiled as he accepted the miniature, tucking it carefully into his waistcoat pocket next to his notebook. "Bravo, mon ami! And now we look ahead. The world remains full of puzzles, some theatrical, some deeply human. Let us trust in the little grey cells to guide us, as they have guided our companions." Over the next days, Hastings and I resumed our familiar routines. Breakfast at the café on Baker Street, commentary upon the morning papers crammed with accounts of Montague's departure, and visits to Scotland Yard to review any new mysteries. Yet in each idle moment I found my thoughts drifting to the gentle echo of Bartholomew's voice, and to the unity forged in the furnace of his trial. One afternoon, as I returned from a brief errand, I discovered Monsieur Poirot seated at his desk, gazing intently at a telegram. On the paper, in precise black letters, were the words, "Signor Montague's first performance in Paris. Press corps found barber's block beneath stage. Please advise." Priam Poirot tapped the telegram thoughtfully. A new puzzle. Hastings, already abroad. Barber's block beneath the stage. An allusion to a guillotine joke. Or perhaps a hidden sentry for dramatic effect. We must write at once. I leaned over his shoulder, excitement stirring. They will need our counsel to ensure no further sabotages befall Montague's grand tour. Poirot nodded, pen poised, over sturdy paper. "Monsieur Priam, je vous remercie pour votre message. I shall travel to Paris forthwith to investigate. In the meantime, I suggest securing all trapdoors and examining backstage passages for irregular contraptions. Trust, but verify every creak of the boards. H. Poirot." He sealed the envelope with measured care and placed it upon the mantel. "The voyage beyond illusion continues, Hastings. Paris beckons." I settled into the armchair opposite, watching the flicker of gaslight upon Poirot's thoughtful profile. "To Paris, mon ami, and to the next adventure." He smiled, moustaches quivering, end of the puzzle of the vanished ventriloquist Yet in every ending lies a new beginning, and in every echo of a hollow voice, the promise of mysteries yet to be unveiled. Chapter 12. The Phantom of the Barbers. Block. The first snowdrifts of February lay heavy upon the tracks as the early morning express steamed into Gare de Lyon. Monsieur Poirot, his pince-nez reflecting the glow of the station lamps, surveyed the throng of porters and passengers with serene satisfaction. At his side stood Mr. Hastings, cloak drawn tight against the cold, and Theodore Priam, who clutched a sheaf of Montague's French contracts as though they were lifelines. The company, Orlando Vale, Lawrence Crouch, and Emile Stokes, followed, with trunks and tap cases in tow. Bartholomew, safely stowed in his padded travel case, peeped from beneath its velvet flap, as though to survey the new world beyond Baker Street. "Paris, my friends," Poirot announced, moustaches quivering, beckons us to a fresh stage of mystery. The barber's block found beneath the French stage, a hint of severed hair, perhaps, or an ironic guillotine pun. We shall discover why Montague's show amuses yet unsettles the Parisians. A carriage conveyed us through the city's narrow streets to the Théâtre de la Gaîté Lyrique, a legend reborn in Belle Époque finery. Outside, poster artists had framed Montague in broad caricature, his silhouette and Bartholomew's side by side, under the headline Le Fantôme du Bloc de Coiffeur. Inside, the ornate foyer bristled, with gilt mirrors, marble columns, and the sweet scent of tuberose. A maître d'hôtel ushered us through velvet-roped corridors to a small salon, where the stage manager, Monsieur Jacques Cormier, awaited us, white-gloved and anxious. "Monsieur Poirot," Cormier greeted with a bow, "you must forgive the haste of this summons. Yesterday's rehearsal was interrupted by an odd discovery. Beneath the false floor of the stage, machinists found a block of wood stained with hair, like the barber's horse block of old, and a strand of jet-black wig fibre. No living barbers are involved, yet the warning seems clear. Cut the performance short, or face humiliation." Poirot nodded sagely, peering at a small clump of curled hair, a single lock held beneath glass. The fiber's luster and thickness indicate a professional wig, perhaps used in grand opera, or in the disguise of an artist. We must examine the stage's trapdoors, the green room's props, and question anyone with motive to hush Signor Montague. Hastings leaned forward. Motive? In Paris of all places, where Montague's fame has preceded him? Cormier pressed, his lips. "Jealousy, monsieur. A rival ventriloquist performed here last season, Monsieur Jules Favreau, before vanishing in scandal. Some say he sabotaged his own end, blaming the dummy for his misfortunes." Vale exchanged a glance with Priam. Favreau was notorious for despair, he murmured. He believed a dummy possessed agency unto itself. Crouch's eyes glittered. He spoke of the puppet's soul, and warned that someone would pay with their voice should he fall. Emile Stokes swallowed. I recognized the fibre from Favreau's final show. He wore a wig of that precise shade. Poirot's moustaches quivered in delight. Then our suspect emerges, a man obsessed with Bartholomew as rival and scapegoat. We begin immediately. We descended through the stage door into the bowels of the theatre. A polychrome labyrinth of fly ropes, pulleys, and hidden chambers. The trapdoor that led to the secret floor lay beneath the painted backdrop of a moonlit boulevard. Poirot knelt to study the surrounding boards, finding scratch marks and dark stains. Crouch knelt beside him, illuminating splinters with his lamp. "Look, monsieur, tiny slivers of the fibre you mention," he whispered. Poirot used a jeweller's loop. Yes, jet-dyed horsehair, woven into an artificial wig. The same blend used by Favreau. Hastings pressed his palm to the trap. "It is newly fitted. Someone reopened it last night." Emile examined footprints in the sawdust. One large, one small. Again, a pair at work. Vale frowned. "Neither mine nor Crouch's. Their sole pattern is unfamiliar. A square toe." Priam produced a list of the theatre's evening staff. Machinists, dressers, a single wig-maker, Mademoiselle Adèle Durand, whose shop lies just off the boulevard. Poirot nodded. "To her we go." The cold morning air greeted us as we crossed Rue de Maubeuge to Adèle Durand's salon, a little boutique of fashionable coiffure. Inside, jewelled combs glinted beneath frosted windows, and a perfumed haze drifted from bottles of violet water. Adèle, a woman of pale refinement, ushered us into her parlour. "Heureux de vous voir, messieurs," she said lightly. Yet her eyes betrayed worry. Poirot presented the fibre. "Mademoiselle, does this blend match any wig you have crafted here?" She shivered, fingers pressed to lace at her throat. "Yes, I made a black wig for Monsieur Favreau last December, for his one-man satire of Hamlet. He wore it only once before he disappeared." Hastings pressed gently. "And since then, any orders for such a wig?" She hesitated. "No, except yesterday. A stranger, wearing a trapdoor mechanical uniform, arrived at dawn. He requested the same blend, paid in cash, and vanished with the wig still pinned to his board." Poirot's eyes gleamed. "A ruse to provide material for sabotage, and that uniform suggests access to the theatre's sub-stage passages. Perhaps one of the machinists, or their foreman." We thanked Adèle and departed swiftly, returning to the theatre to question the stage crew. In the machine workshop, Priam presented the wig piece to the foreman, Monsieur Fournier, a burly, grey-bearded veteran. He paled on sight of the hair. "Mon Dieu, that is from the Favreau wig," he stammered, "but I have never seen it here." Hastings noted the sweat upon his brow as he cleaned oil from his hands. "Yet your uniform. Fournier, your son, requested leave yesterday, citing a family emergency." Fournier's jaw tightened. "My son René, he was dismissed for drunkenness last month. He said he sought to prove himself by playing tricks on the ventriloquist." He swallowed. "I begged him to reform. I did not know he would resort to this." Poirot inclined his head. "Then we must find René Fournier. He may yet hide. In the sub-stage." Armed with lanterns, we climbed once more into the bowels of the Apollo, past the trapdoor, along the flanking corridors, until we reached the discarded props store. Here we found Rostand's fountain from Cyrano, some wooden arches, and beneath a tarpaulin, a disused guillotine prop, its blade dulled, but the wooden block stained dark. Poirot knelt to examine it. The barber's block, a dramatic fitted prop, used once in a comedy of blood, yet now repurposed for menace. He tapped a nail protruding from the side. A strand of black hair wound around it. Hastings peeled it away. "Still Favreau's fibre." Crouch climbed onto a crate and noted footprints leading to a narrow hatch in the floor. Larger, square-toed boots again. Hastings fit Fournier's son's boots, identical sole pattern. Poirot nodded. Rendezvous at the old trap. The perfect vantage for sabotage, as stars above and rabbits below conspire in darkness. Let us descend. Below the hatch we found a dusty chamber of ancient machinery. The trapdoor and a second concealed panel had been used recently. Hinges gleamed, and sawdust lay in fresh drifts. As the lantern swayed, a voice whispered from the gloom, "Stop, or I will slash you mute." A figure in leather apron, René Fournier, lunged from the shadows, a carving knife in hand. "René!" his father called from above, confronting him. "Cease this madness!" Poirot stepped forward, calm as ever. "Mon jeune homme, you believed revenge would restore your father's pride. Yet you nearly silenced our signor and robbed the audience of delight." René faltered, tears in his eyes. I only wished to be seen, to have my skill known. They all loved the other dummy, so I sought to vanish Bartholomew, to let my own creation rise." He dropped the knife, crouched, knelt to gather the fibre from René's apron. More Faverolles fibre. Poirot waved to Fournier Senior. "Bring your son into the light. We shall explain all to the authorities, and to Signor Montague, who deserves the truth." Back in Montague's dressing room, the company awaited with anxious expressions. René was led forward, pale and contrite. Montague's eyes softened as he beheld the youth's remorse. Vale placed a gentle hand upon René's shoulder. René bowed his head. "I stole the fibre to threaten Bartholomew's silence, so that mine might be heard. I meant no real harm." Montague stepped toward him. "You have harmed me, and yet I forgive you, for every voice must learn its place in harmony, not in sabotage." He embraced René. Hastings added, "And your father's love called you back from the shadows." Fournier Senior wept aloud. Poirot at last spoke to the assembled troop. The final puzzle, woven of fibre and vengeance, resolves in compassion. Let this epilogue remind us that every performer, no matter how hidden, deserves his day in the light. Montague raised René's hand before the company and the gathered audience, extending pardon. Bartholomew's wooden hand tapped the rail in applause. Outside, Paris's pale sky brightened, as though in on the miracle of reconciling pride and forgiveness. And so concluded the 12th chapter of The Vanished Ventriloquist. Beneath Paris's gilded stage, a young man's ambition nearly doomed, a master's art, but was redeemed by the very bond he sought to sever. In that revelation, the final act of our Odyssey was etched, not in shadows of sabotage, but in the radiant echo of restored harmony. Chapter 13. The masquerade of Shadows a Week had passed since the drama in Paris, and the company's European tour pressed on to Vienna, the gilded capital of music and mystery. Under slate-grey skies spliced by pale sunshine, we descended from the Orient Express at Wien Franz Josefs Bahnhof. The station's vaulted iron canopy glimmered with frost, and the scent of chimney smoke mingled with the faint perfume of apple strudel. Montague, clad in a deep navy greatcoat, Bartholomew securely nestled in his silver-lined case, greeted us with his characteristic bow. Behind him walked Theodore Priam, Orlando Vale, Lawrence Crouch, and the ever-anxious Emile Stokes. "Colonel," Ramsay had returned to England for army duty, but Lady Beckingham and Professor Winthrop joined us, eager for the grandeur of Vienna's stage. Poirot surveyed the ornate façade of the Théâtre en der Vienne with appreciative eyes. "Mes amis," he said, moustaches quivering, "few cities rival Vienna's love of spectacle, but in a place famed for masked balls and midnight intrigues, our host must tread warily." I shivered in the wind. Have the masks of Paris already fallen? Poirot winked. Only time will reveal whether a new shadow stalks Bartholomew, or whether the mischief of Faverolles' legacy remains buried in the Rhine's depths. We drove through narrow streets lined with Baroque facades to our lodgings at the Hotel Imperial. In the grand salon, gilded mirrors reflected candelabra's glow, and a quartet played Vivaldi's Adagio. Montague excused himself to rehearse, leaving us to discuss logistics. Lady Beckingham suggested a masked rehearsal in the afternoon, a trial run for the evening's grand masquerade benefit, where Montague would appear in costume, his dummy concealed until the final unmasking. Professor Winthrop approved, extolling the pedagogical value of controlled disguise, while Vail sketched backdrop enhancements inspired by Klimt's murals. Poirot remained pensive, fingertips brushing the ivory handle of his cane. That evening, under the great dome of the Coursalon, Viennese aristocrats fluttered in sequins and plumes, their faces hidden behind Venetian masks of gilded filigree. Bartholomew's case lay at Montague's feet behind a small velvet drape, awaiting the signal for reveal. The conductor raised his baton, and the orchestra's polka invited a swirl of dancers. Montague stepped forward in a velvet domino cloak and a half-mask of black satin. He began his routine, a lively dialogue of voices that rippled laughter through the crowded hall. But at the height of the performance, when Montague was to vanish Bartholomew behind a painted screen, an ominous crack resounded. The stage's painted archway, lurching, fitted with concealed panels, snapped ajar, and the dummy's case yawned open to reveal empty velvet. A horrified gasp rose from the audience. Montague froze, baritone faltering. He turned, eyes wide, and uttered only Bartholomew's bright refrain, "Qu'est-ce qui m'arrive? Where is my master's voice?" In that electric moment, the masks of society slipped. Poirot leapt to the footlights, raised his hand for calm. "Mesdames et messieurs, please remain seated." He paced centre stage, evaluating the scene with his little grey cells ablaze. Bartholomew has vanished once more, yet the clues remain. He pointed to the snapped arch hinges. Our culprit sought to humiliate the signor in the city of masquerades. Note how the panel was opened from within, not forced from without. Hastings joined Poirot on stage, scanning the floor for evidence. "Here," he murmured, kneeling to lift a tuft of auburn hair, long, fine, and distinctly female. He passed it to Poirot, who examined it through a jeweller's loupe. "This belongs to no aristocratic coquette," Poirot said, "rather to a professional actress, one with auburn tresses and access to our stage." He turned to the applauses. "Hush! I must question every performer in tonight's masquerade." Behind the curtain, Montague, mask removed, stood pale as sheetwork. Priam hurried to his side. "Vincenzo, do not despair. We shall recover him." Montague's jaw trembled. "Too many vanishings," he whispered. "I fear his voice lost again." Priam opened his notebook, a chart of the evening's participants. Let us begin with the prima donna of the opera, Madame Sabine Charbonnet. She arrived late, wearing a red wig, and took the stage immediately after you. Vale observed quietly, "She wears auburn locks beneath her wig. A match for that hair." Poirot beckoned Hastings and Vale. "To the opera dressing-rooms, quickly." We wound through a maze of corridors, past gilded foyers where masked nobles murmured of the scandal. In Madame Charbonnet's antechamber, her dresser stood at attention, spray bottle in hand. Poirot entered. "Madame, may I ask if you borrowed this tuft of hair?" He displayed the auburn lock. The dresser's hand flew to her lips. "Non, monsieur, I swear I have not touched the dummy." Poirot's gaze settled on a low cabinet, its door slightly ajar. He pulled it open to reveal a bootleg stowed within, Bartholomew's velvet glove, stained with stage dust. The dresser gasped. But Madame Charbonnet arrived only moments before her aria." She pointed down the corridor. Madame stood in her rehearsal bodice, mask thrown aside, face drawn. Poirot advanced. "Madame Charbonnet, you have fashioned a clever diversion. You seized the puppet to enhance your dramatic scene, hoping to upstage Signor Montague." Sabine's painted lips curled in fury. "I needed the sensation. My career languishes in his shadow." She swept forward, flinging crimson tresses. "Let Bartholomew remain hidden. My opera will shine all the brighter." Poirot's eyes narrowed. Art born of malice leaves its marks. He drew a palmful of glove fibres from the cabinet. "You concealed this puppet glove here, but you forgot the velvet snap would snag on your bodice, leaving these threads." He displayed them. Sabine's face crumpled. "I imagined I could borrow his stage presence, yet I would never truly harm him." She burst into tears. Vale and Crouch moved to comfort her. Priam arrived to gather his scattered notes. Montague, summoned by a stagehand, approached the broken archway. Bartholomew's velvet glove lay beneath the arch's base. Montague picked it up gingerly, then knelt to call, "Bartholomew, come forth!" He pressed a hidden latch, and the puppet emerged from a concealed panel opposite, his carved grin fresher than ever. The crowd, newly assembled in the stalls, gasped and then cheered as Bartholomew waddled to Montague's side. Montague swept Sabine into an embrace. "Your passion is matched only by your talent, yet it requires temperance. Welcome him to the stage." Sabine sniffed, wiping tears. I apologize, Vincenzo." Bartholomew's high voice piped, "All is forgiven, provided you join our duet." The audience rose in tumultuous applause as Montague took Bartholomew's wooden hand. Poirot stepped forward with a gracious nod. "Mesdames et messieurs, the phantom of the barber's block has become the phantom of the masked ball. Yet truth, like music, resonates beyond the veil of disguise." The final act resumed. Montague and Bartholomew's voices intertwined in a playful fugue, Sabine joining in soprano, and the mask of jealousy fell away in harmony. Backstage, Poirot convened a brief gathering. "Let this incident remind us that artistry thrives not in theft of another's spotlight, but in honest collaboration. Madame Charbonnet's misstep arose from fear, yet in confession and embrace she found a new alliance." He turned to Sabine. "Join Signor Montague's tour if you will. There is room for 3 voices in your European sojourn." Sabine's eyes shone. "But of course," she declared. "Let me repay Montague's generosity with my voice." Montague grinned. "Bartholomew, welcome our new duet partner." The dummy clicked his heels in assent. That night, as the company dined at a candlelit table beneath the theatre's frescoed ceiling, Priam raised his glass. To trust reclaimed, to artistry shared, and to the little grey cells that detect not only clues, but compassion, Montague added, and to the masks we wear, may they always fall in service of truth. Laughter and clinking crystal echoed among the gilded columns. As I reflected on the masquerade of shadows, I realized that every great performance and every great mystery centers upon the courage to unmask our fears, to confess our faults, and to embrace the extraordinary harmony born of reconciliation. And in that, the final chapters of this extraordinary voyage across illusion's threshold drew near their harmonious close. Chapter 14. The Spectre of the Automaton. The cold wind that swept down Friedrichstrasse seemed almost to carry a warning as we approached the grand façade of the Friedrichstadtpalast for what promised to be Vincenzo Montague's crowning performance. The streets of Berlin were still frosted by early winter, and the lights of the boulevard twinkled like constellations fallen to earth. Poirot, wrapped in his sable-lined overcoat, surveyed the scene with a contemplative air, his little grey cells humming with promise. I, Captain Hastings, followed him closely, my breath misting in the lantern glow, while Theodore Priam marshalled our small company, Orlando Vale bearing the new Berlin backdrop, Lawrence Crouch with his case of spare dummy parts, Emile Stokes clutching Bartholomew's velvet-lined travel box, and Madame Sabine Charbonnet adjusting the silver lace of her mask. Montague himself stood attentively, his hand resting upon the puppet's case, as though to reassure the little wooden figure that no further vanishing acts would befall him. There was none of the usual backstage bustle about the entrance. Instead, an uneasy hush had fallen over the stage door, as if even the stagehands sensed that this final show carried a weight heavier than mere entertainment. Poirot caught my arm, his keen gaze fixed on the crack in one of the trapdoor fittings. "Observe, Hastings," he murmured. "That bolt has been loosened. Someone intends to take us by surprise tonight." My heart quickened, for already my mind raced through the litany of missing dummies, stolen voices, threatened sabotage. It appeared that even in Berlin, our adventure was far from over. Inside the magnificent foyer, crystal chandeliers cast prisms upon gilt-framed mirrors, and patrons in fur-trimmed coats whispered eagerly of Montague's return. We passed swiftly through the rosewood corridor to the green room, where Montague rehearsed his opening speech. His baritone rang clear. "Meine Damen und Herren, welcome to an evening of marvel and mirth. In our travels we have tested friendships, confronted shadows beneath the stage and above, and now stand ready to conclude our tale in harmony." Bartholomew's nose peeked from the velvet case, and with his bright nasal tone he cried, "And may no automaton outvoice us tonight!" A faint crackle of applause drifted in from the auditorium, but there was something brittle about it, as though the audience themselves expected the impossible. Vale replaced the backdrop curtain, and Crouch tightened the screws on the puppet's jaw mechanism. Even Emile Stokes seemed tense, his fingers brushing the case's lock as if to ensure it would not betray them. When the overture faded, Montague took the footlights in his stride. Bartholomew perched securely beside him. The first half of the act unfolded flawlessly. The gentle banter, the witty repartee, the classic vanishing and reappearance of Bartholomew among the painted colonnades. The crowd chuckled, the orchestra swelled, and I allowed myself a moment's relief. And then, with the final chord of the second number still echoing, the stage lights dimmed to a single spot, and a mechanical whirring sounded from the shadows, an undercurrent of whine and click that set my teeth on edge. Montague froze, his practised poise gone in an instant. His hand darted to Bartholomew's shoulder. The dummy's wooden mouth twitched, and a distorted voice issued from it. I have been replaced." Where once there had been a bright nasal tone, there now came an echo as cold and hollow as metal grinding against metal. The audience gasped, some clutching their pearls, others leaning forward as though drawn by some unholy magnet. At that precise moment, two figures emerged from either side of the proscenium arch. They moved with an uncanny precision. Automatons, clearly carved from lacquered wood, dressed in velvet coats and white gloves, each bearing a case identical to Bartholomew's. The first lifted its lid, revealing a mechanical duplicate of the puppet, its glass eyes unblinking. Gears clacked in its chest, valves hissed, and when it spoke, its voice box produced the same two tones, Montague's baritone and Bartholomew's squeak, only warped by endless repetition. From the wings, Crouch lunged forward, desperate to snatch the man-made impostor. Benoit, one of the stagehands, shouted and tried to intervene, but the false puppet sprang to life, stepping down beside the real Bartholomew, taunting him with an inhuman simulacrum of his own voice. "Behold, the future of artifice. Flesh is fragile, but iron endures." Montague drew himself erect, chest heaving. He called to Priam, who rushed to his side. I sprang onto the stage, lantern in hand, as Poirot followed at my heels. "Ladies and gentlemen," Poirot's smooth voice cut through the mechanical din, a small jest of ingenuity, but one born of envy and hubris. He swept a gloved hand toward the automatons. "These devices were engineered by one Friedrich Draxler, once a celebrated mechanician, whose soul grew brittle after his collapse with Favreau in Paris. He sought to prove that artifice can supplant artistry, yet he forgot that no gear, no spring, can mimic the spark of the living heart." The first automaton's head jerked around, as though hearing an unseen cue, and it strode forward to block Poirot's path. Hastings and I flanked it, but before we could seize it, Crouch wrenched at its power spring. A coil of brass so fine it resembled polished ribbon. With a final shriek of gears, the automaton collapsed in a heap of clockwork and carved limbs. The second imitator followed suit under Priam's firm hand, its once menacing voice fading to an echoing squeal before falling silent. The audience sat stunned, then erupted in spontaneous applause. Montague embraced Bartholomew, whose bright voice quavered between relief and triumph. "They cannot replace me. I am the one and only." Montague bowed deeply to the crowd, and so concludes our final jest. May it remind us that soul endures beyond steel. Backstage, Poirot marshalled the company into the wings. As Benjamin Fournier's son had discovered in Paris, so Draxler's machinations in Berlin had been exposed by the keenest of eyes and the steadiest of hearts. Yet Poirot insisted that we not depart without confronting Draxler himself and ensuring that no trace of his spectre remained in the theatre's bowels. We descended into the sub-stage corridors, where pipework and rigging intertwined like the veins of some great mechanical beast. At the far end, in a small chamber lined with spare gears and cogs, we found Draxler bent over a workbench, cradling one of his failed automaton heads. His face, once animated by genius, was now drawn, with regret, at Poirot's approach. His shoulders slumped, the head slipping from his grasp. "Monsieur Draxler," Poirot intoned gently, "you sought to illuminate the theatre with your craft, but you veered into darkness, believing that artifice can outlast the living moment." Draxler's eyes brimmed with tears. I wanted to prove that metal endures when flesh decays. I envied Montague's art, how his voice lives in the hearts of all who hear it." He lifted the broken automaton head. "But machines bear no soul. They echo only what is taught, never what is felt." Poirot laid a hand on his shoulder. "Your talent is undeniable, but only tempered by humility will it serve humanity. I propose you join Montague's company, not as a saboteur, but as a custodian of his legacy. Let your clockwork guide lost voices back to those who cherish them. Honesty and the transformative power of concealment laid bare." And though the tour beyond illusion carried Montague's company into new realms, the echoes of laughter, confession, and reunion would forever resonate within the walls of Baker Street as proof that no artifice, wooden, mechanical, or human, can endure without the true voice of the heart. With hearts full and spirits high, we emptied our sherry glasses, closed the final page of our account, and prepared, ever ready, for whatever new enigma might cross our path. For in the end, it is not the puzzle itself, but the harmony of its resolution that leaves the greatest echo. Draxler nodded, tears slipping down his cheeks. He offered to dismantle every automaton and donate the gears to the theatre's museum, as a caution against the hubris of unbridled invention. Montague appeared at the chamber door, Bartholomew in his arms, and extended his hand in fellowship. "A new partnership," Montague said, voice gentle, "that blends the art of clockwork with the art of the heart." Draxler gripped his hand, and in that simple act, the chasm between man and machine was bridged by trust. We returned to the auditorium in triumph, where Montague and Bartholomew delivered the final bow before the footlights extinguished. The house lights rose to reveal the joyous faces of friends and patrons, united in shared relief and delight. Later, back at the Hotel Imperial, we gathered in the grand salon for a simple supper. Montague raised a crystal glass of Tokaji, its amber glow recalling the warmth of friendship. Vale lifted his own in salute. To ingenuity rightly directed, and to the living voice that no machine may ever supplant, Crouch added, "To the little grey cells that guide us through every dark mechanism into the light." Sabine, clutching a fine lace handkerchief, offered, "To compassion, stronger than any automaton's spring." And Emile Stokes, eyes bright, toasted, "To unity that sustains both art and heart." Poirot, quietly content, sipped his brandy. To harmony restored, and to the promise that every marvel, however mechanical, finds its highest purpose when shaped by kindness. As the candles guttered in the salon's tall candelabra, I realized that our odyssey through vanished dummies, stolen identities, masking intrigue, and now mechanized mimicry had always led back to a single truth: that the bond between artist and audience, between man and his creation, endures beyond every contrivance. And in that living truth, the spectre of the automaton found its only rightful end. Chapter 15. The Echo of the Little Grey Cells. The early spring sunshine that filled the salon at Baker Street on the morning of March 10th seemed to herald both awakening and farewell. Across the low mahogany table, Signor Vincenzo Montague arranged his small silver case upon a velvet cloth, Bartholomew's home between performances, while Theodore Priam paced patiently, his ever-ready ledger clutched. In one hand, Orlando Vale, Lawrence Crouch, and Emile Stokes gathered at the hearth, each bearing a keepsake from their continental odyssey. Lady Marguerite Beckingham and Professor Laura Winthrop filled the armchairs by the window, and Colonel Ramsay, resting from his recent tour of military academies, lounged with newspaper accounts of the Berlin finale. Yet it was Hercule Poirot, seated in his favourite slippered repose, whose composed visage framed the quiet anticipation in the room. Across from him, Captain Arthur Hastings, watched with a mixture of pride and melancholy, knowing this final chapter would bring both closure and new beginnings. Montague stood and tapped the lip of his velvet case. Mes amis, this morning marks the end of our European tour. The grand spectacle that began with Bartholomew's disappearance wove through Parisian intrigue, Viennese masquerade, and Berlin's automaton rebellion, and now returns us to the hearth of Baker Street. We have witnessed the perils of envy, the power of confession, and the triumph of unity. Let this gathering be our last performance together, not on any stage, but here, in the warmth of friendship. Bartholomew's wooden lips curved in a carved smile as Montague lifted the puppet from his case. In a bright nasal voice, the dummy added, "And may our lessons echo longer than any melody." Laughter rippled through the salon, and even Colonel Ramsay's stern countenance softened. Priam raised his glass of Earl Grey tea in salute. To Signor Montague and his indomitable dummy, who proved that no puppet's silence can outlast by man's devotion. Each in turn raised their cups, Vale, Crouch, Stokes, Beckingham, Winthrop, Ramsay, and finally Hastings and Poirot joined the chorus. The echoes of the toast dissolved into thoughtful silence. Poirot set his saucer upon the table, his green eyes reflecting both mirth and gravity. Mes amis, he began in his quiet, deliberate tone, throughout this extraordinary voyage, we have learned that a puzzle, however strange, always yields its answer to patience, observation, and above all, compassion. Tonight we conclude the case of the vanished ventriloquist, not with a final crime to solve, but with a testament to human kindness. Montague inclined his head, cradling Bartholomew. Hercule, you have been the architect of our revelations. Without your little grey cells, we might still chase shadows beneath the stage. Poirot's moustaches twitched in delighted modesty. No, signor, your courage opened the door, and your willingness to forgive drew us through. He turned to the company. Let us each share a reflection, that the lessons we carry forward may guide us in all our endeavours. Orlando Vale spoke first, voice soft but steady. I entered these theatres as a solitary craftsman, fearful that my art would be eclipsed by the marvel of ventriloquism. Yet in darkness I found fellowship. I learned that the backdrop supports the actor, but the actor gives meaning to the backdrop. In service to one another, we create true beauty. Lawrence Crouch added with a wry grin, I once thought that ventriloquism was a trick of tongue and wood, but I have seen how a shared secret, like a whispered line, can forge bonds stronger than any splintered plank. Emile Stokes, his pale cheeks rosy with newfound confidence, confessed, I erred when I sought to protect through concealment. Yet I discovered that honesty, though sometimes costly, yields forgiveness and trust. I now know that no artifice surpasses genuine loyalty. Madame Charbonnet, her auburn hair tamed into a simple chignon, spoke next, and I sought the spotlight by sabotage, only to discover that a stolen voice is a hollow prize. In unity, 3 voices blend richer than one. I pledged to join Montague's tour not as rival, but as collaborator. Lady Beckingham lifted her teacup. In the realm of diplomacy, I have seen how misunderstandings are born of unspoken fears. Tonight, we have proven that every rift can be bridged by candid confession and mutual respect. Professor Winthrop, fingers still fluttering with excitement, over her lecture notes offered, This case has been a living treatise in ethics. We confronted envy, deception, and even technological hubris. Yet each time, compassion and reason dissolved the darkest schemes. May we carry this experiment of the human heart into every sphere of knowledge and culture. Colonel Ramsay, ever. The soldier tapped his glove against the arm of his chair. I raised a sword against folly once, only to replace it with a foil in peace fencing. Now I carry forward the lesson that a blade, whether of steel or of tongue, must always be wielded with honour. Montague paused before speaking again, his baritone resonant with gratitude. I stand here blessed by your counsel, my friends. Bartholomew and I leave Baker Street, not as performers alone, but as carriers of a banner of unity. Wherever we go, whether to the theatres of Milan, the salons of Madrid, or the palaces of St. Petersburg, we shall honour the lessons learned in Baker Street's hearth, that open hearts, like open stages, invite the truest performances. He turned to me, placing Bartholomew's hand upon my shoulder, in a gesture both humorous and heartfelt. Hastings, you chronicled our Odyssey with unwavering courage. Will you accompany us once more, as historian of this remarkable art? I felt a swell of emotion as I nodded. It would be my greatest honour, Signor. Poirot lifted one hand in farewell, and I, mon ami Hastings, shall remain at the ready, with my little grey cells, prepared to unravel any new puzzle, on any stage, in any land. A hush settled over the salon, as Montague carefully recased Bartholomew, and Priam brought forward a silver trunk ready for dispatch. Lady Beckingham and the Professor rose to assist. The last of the tea was drained. The final rose petal brushed from the tablecloth. Outside the sun climbed higher, scattering the early spring chill. We stood in a broad circle as Montague prepared to depart. Vale and Crouch carried the backdrop sketches. Stokes shouldered the puppet's travel case. Priam hefted his ledger. Madame Charbonnet adjusted her mask in poised readiness. Colonel Ramsay saluted. Lady Beckingham and Professor Winthrop exchanged warm embraces. Poirot and I stepped forward to lead our friends to the carriage. Montague turned once more toward Baker Street. His voice rang clear in the cool air. Adieu, and may every theatre's footlights shine as bright as the bonds we share this day. Bartholomew chimed in. Au revoir, and may every vanished voice find its home. With that, the carriage rolled away, its horses' hooves clicking upon the pavement. I watched until the last flicker of velvet and silver disappeared around the corner, leaving Baker Street quiet, but still resonant with the memory of our journey. Back at number 21B, I found Poirot's armchair awaiting us both. He sank into it with a contented sigh, steepling his fingers as he peered toward the empty hearth, where Bartholomew's face had glowed upon its mantle. Mon ami, he said softly, we have done our duty. The little grey cells have once again guided us to justice, kindness, and truth. I poured 2 small sherries and handed one to him. To the next mystery, Hercule, and to the enduring magic of the human spirit. He raised his glass, moustaches quivering. To the next puzzle, Hastings, and to the symphony of hearts that solves every enigma. As the evening shadows gathered in the corners of the room, I reflected that the case of the vanished ventriloquist was more than a mere series of vanishing acts. It had been a testament to the resilience of friendship, the necessity of